Thanks to everyone who's joined already. You're all stars. Please let me know if you can't hear me. We're just going to wait a few minutes and give everyone a chance to join. Please make sure you've got yourself a cup of coffee and a comfy chair, although not too comfy because we don't want you falling asleep. But that shouldn't be a problem today because we have some excellent talks lined up and I'll get to all the important information soon. In the meantime, feel free to chat using the text box. I can play the elevator music again. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. And I really hope I can turn it off again later. Let's try that. Oh no, I think I accidentally turned it off. That's okay. I can see some more people have joined, so welcome. And sorry, Ben. While I have the cod, I thought it might be a good moment to get everyone thinking about not only the future of MWA. Oh, let's turn my video on. That set a good example. Okay. Let's think about not just the future of MWA and where we're headed, which is really what this meeting is all about, but also to remember how far we've come, to think back on the past. And I thought, what better way to reflect and to show progress than with an embarrassing photo collage. But strangely enough, no one wanted to volunteer their old photos that I would be poking fun at. So the following pictures are just of me and I apologise. Whoops. There's that music. Now we can't get rid of it. Here we are. Now I'm about to start my 7th year with the project. So the trainee sticker on my badge is starting to wear off, unfortunately. And I'm beginning to think that I'm old hat with this MWA stuff. I was there for phase 1. I helped build phase 2, and I'm here now to help kick off phase 3. We won't mention phase 4 yet, but it's going to be great. You'll love it. So it's kind of difficult for me, weirdly enough, to imagine a time when I wasn't part of this project. And I can just about hear everyone laughing from around the world because of that. Hopefully you're saying things like, oh, Mia, you're still young, sort of. And that attitude is very naive. And you know what? You're absolutely right. That really hit home this week. When I realised that the earliest reference that I could find to the project online was 2007, when I was the ripe old age of 14. So for those that were shaking their heads at me, they'll be pleased to know that I have been humbled by this knowledge. And I appreciate even more now how extensive this project is, that it draws on the knowledge and the years of so many experts in a global collaboration. Now, since it seems like we've hit critical mass, I think now's a good time to get started. We can wait a little bit longer. I hope that was fun. We are now recording on YouTube, so I might have to delete that part later. It's fantastic that so many of our members are here with us today virtually. Hopefully soon we'll be able to have these meetings again in person. For those that haven't met me, my name is Mia Walker. I'm based at Curtin University in Australia, and I'm in the operations and the management teams of the MWA. And I have the great pleasure of chairing this half-day meeting today. And it's really the rest of the operations and management teams that we're going to be highlighting today, as we have been very busy this year preparing the telescope for a much anticipated phase 3. And what does that mean for you as a scientist? Well, stay tuned to find out, as the program is going to be set up to mimic the new signal chain that we'll be stepping through. So you'll have a chance to ask all your questions. For housekeeping, yes, I'll remind you again that we are live on YouTube and the recording will be uploaded to the MWA channel for those who need to view the talks later, or who would just like to flick back and remember all the brilliant and witty things I'm sure to say. And I know it can be daunting for some people to be on camera, not for others. But please try to have your cameras on as much as possible. It's so much better for our presenters to see your engagement, to see your lovely faces rather than disembodied names staring back at them. If that's not possible, then at the least it would be wonderful if you could turn your camera on just for the group photo at the end of the meeting, and I'll take a screenshot of the gallery. You might have noticed, but we're bringing back the hilarious automated transcript feature for this meeting, because watching software mishear all of your acronyms was definitely a highlight of the last meeting for me personally anyway. So this feature will be somewhere in your Zoom menu if you're interested in turning that on. And if someone could mention in the chat where exactly participants can find it, that would be great. We do want to answer all of your questions. To make that easy, you can either just type it into the chat box during the talk, or you can use the raise hand feature and wait for me to unmute you to ask your question after the talk. Now for the important stuff. So Australia's first astronomers were the traditional custodians of the land, the Aboriginal and the Torres Strait Islander peoples, and we recognise and we value their long-standing systems of knowledge on which we are continuing to build. And the MWA telescope is on Wadjuri Yamaji Budja, or Wadjuri Yamaji country. And we would like to pay our respects to their elders, past and present. And we'd like to extend that respect to all First Peoples who might be joining us today. And with that, if he's ready, I'll hand over to our board chair, Stuart, for his update. If not, we can bring back the elevator music.
No, I'm happy to kick off, Mia. I was just trying to, I have a picture of some people on the call here from 2006 assembling MWA antennas on the roof.
Fantastic.
The physics building. I'll try and dig one of those out for you. So thanks. So I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that I'm attending the meeting from the lands of the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. So as Mia mentioned, I'm Stuart Wyeth. I'm chairing the board this year. And this is the second year we're not able to hold these meetings in person, and that's really unfortunate. And I hope we can get back together. I know meetings are starting to come back, and quite a few of us are looking forward to a meeting, an in-person conference next week, which is going to be great as part of one of our centres of excellence. So I hope this group can rejoin soon as well. So I'd like to thank Mia, Steve and all the team for again suggesting we have this project meeting online, and for everyone here making space to attend. It's going to be really exciting to see all the progress that's been made this year. It's quite impressive. So I think in for a really interesting morning. So the board will meet next week. We haven't met yet, so I can't give any reports, but looking forward to discussing a range of issues that we're going to hear about today, in particular the exciting developments for the next phase of the MWA and the new science capacity that this is generating and will generate. So that's going to be covered in detail this morning, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the latest. So I guess with that, I'd like to actually take this opportunity to thank on behalf of the board, the project and management team for their ongoing commitment to the MWA. It's a really committed, enthusiastic, devoted team, and I think you can see that in the way that the telescopes move forwards this year in the face of various difficulties, fires, COVID, all these things, and yet the observatory remains in a really great state with lots of engaged, excited science. I would like to remind members of the collaboration of their commitment at this meeting that they'll maintain collegial, professional, inclusive environment as per the MWA Code of Conduct. These meetings are always cordial, but I do want to remind everyone of that. And then finally, before handing back to Mia, I want to take the opportunity to note a couple of changes that are coming to the board in 2022. In particular, on behalf of the board, I want to thank George Heald and Ivy Wong, who are going to conclude their terms on the board. So I was really indebted to George for his help and guidance as chair when I came in, drawing on his experience. Of course, he was chair for several years before I came onto the board. And also Ivy, who's been deputy chair for the last 2 years, and I've really appreciated her advice and work as well. This year's the end of my term as chair. I'll be stepping off the board after next week's board meeting. It's been a really privilege to be part of the project in this role as it prepares for phase 3. I think the observatory is in fabulous hands. So the board's going to welcome Tess Wernstrom and Phil Edwards at the first meeting in 2022, and we'll elect a new chair at its meeting next week. So with that, I'll hand back to Mia, and welcome again to the project meeting, and hope you all enjoy the morning's talks and information. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Stuart. We are already very in front of where we expected to be in the schedule. So I really hope Stephen is prepared to talk.
Never not ready to talk, Mia. And I can guarantee that I'm going to bring the schedule in even further. There's no way I'm going to spend an entire 40 minutes, which is good because I want to give the maximum amount of time for the people who've done the work who are presenting today to go into a lot of detail, and maybe we can have time for a bit of discussion as well. So I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country on which I'm joining the meeting from, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and extend my respect to those elders past, present and emerging, and of course our friends and colleagues from the Yamaji Nation where we're building the MWA telescope. And I'd like to welcome any First Nations people anywhere around the world who's joining the call today. So I do not have PowerPoint slides. Like I say, I'm not going to spend 40 minutes. What I'd like to try and do is give some sort of high-level reflection on the year that's passed, but most importantly, look forwards to next year, which is, I think, going to be a busy and exciting year for the MWA. And I'd like to try and give a sense for the trajectory that we're going to seek to traverse over the coming years. So first of all, this year, yes, Stu mentioned that it has been a challenging year. Post-COVID has brought many impacts to travel, supply chains, procurement of electronics and computers, and all sorts of things that have incurred some challenges over the course of this year. And we're also scheduled, of course, to replace the MWA correlator. So the fact that that has all been completed, I think, is a massive testament to the team. And really up front, I want to thank the MWA operations team and the people outside the operations team who've contributed to the delivery of the correlator for just a magnificent effort. Most of the collaboration doesn't see the day-to-day challenges that crop up, the scheduling and the rescheduling, the contingency planning, all of the detail that goes into the delivery of something like the new correlator is really substantial. So definitely want to call out the team for that and just say, well done. So the new correlator is in place, has passed its engineering commissioning under the watchful eye of our principal engineer, Randall Waith, and the team. And we're now into the science commissioning phase. And it appears to be going pretty well. You'll hear more details later, but everything I hear from the people who are utilising the correlator in the different modes tells me that things are going really well. I believe data from the new correlator have been through the full EOR pipeline of Kat's team. Ramesh Bhatt told me just the other day that The high time resolution data from the new correlator has now been through the full processing pipeline for pulsar searches and detection. So they're pretty big milestones. We will spend the remainder of this year and sometime into next year completing those science commissioning activities. And Chris is our principal scientist, and Ben McKinley as the deputy principal scientist, are keeping a close eye on how all that will progress. We're also going to take that opportunity to remain in the compact configuration of the array until we can complete a couple of high-profile, long-term projects that require that array. And principally, that is the smart survey for pulsars. So we really want to get through that, complete the full observing, and make sure that we've got a complete uniform data set for the searching of pulsars. And you would have seen through the emails recently that the pulsar team is making some pretty great strides, even with the shallow processing of the smart survey and discovering brand new pulsars. So we want to get through that, see how we land at the end of science commissioning. Part of taking it somewhat conservatively during that period is that at the same time as commissioning the correlator, we also have to pretty carefully manage our data ingest into Pawsey, because they're changing their data archiving system and their storage systems. So we've just got to take it a bit easy and make sure that we don't exceed our limits. But I'm hoping in the first couple of months of next year, we will have completed most of that and certainly understand the trajectory. And I'll be looking for a new call for proposals, likely timed for around about February, for around about a May to June commencement. And that would entail a switch into the long baseline array, since we've been in the short baseline array for quite some time now. So we'll see what the demand is like for the long baseline observations, and we'll make some decision as to the duration that we'll spend in that array during the course of 2022. So that's charting a pretty nice trajectory out of the establishment of the new correlator, and charts a bit of a path for the scientific opportunities for next year. In parallel with that, 2022 is going to be quite a big year of technical development. As you'll be aware, and you'll see some update details a bit later, the teams at the Shanghai Astronomical Observatory and Curtin University are well into the development of a new receiver system. As you all know, the receivers that we're currently operating have been operating for the best part of a decade. And frankly, it's simply astonishing that they're still operational, almost a decade in that environment. The components are quite old. Some of the components you can't source anymore. So those receivers are well past their nominal end of life. And once again, I think it's a testament to the team that they've nursed these complicated beasts and they're still operational at this point. But we can't bank on them being operational forever. So Randall and colleagues over the last 12 months plus have been working on the new receiver systems. They're coming along very nicely. Prototypes are being shipped and prototypes have been tested. So the big development for next year will see us in the first half of 2022 seek to incorporate at least one prototype new receiver into the array. So you can imagine that a telescope that spent all of its life in a 128T mode probably has a few hard-coded things in the system introducing a new receiver, adding new tiles into the correlator is going to require a little bit of work to make sure that that integration is seamless. So first half of next year, we'll be looking to add those new receivers. And I'm going to be bold and say that perhaps by the end of next year, we may be able to operate routinely with those additional tiles and receivers. So it could be possible by the end of next year that we are operating with 150 tiles instead of 128. So that would add some interesting new capability, but most importantly would set the scene for the rollout of even more new receivers in 2023. And the stretch goal would be by the end of 2023 to have all 256 tiles connected up with either new receivers or, assuming that the old receivers survive, the old receivers. So that's a stretch goal with a pretty significant error bar on it. So it's certainly not something that we are promising, but the technical trajectory towards that is going to be front of mind for next year. So on the technical front, that's where we're going, and that's all going pretty well. Come 2023, the only thing that's going to stand in our way is money. So over the last 6 months or so, we've had a really good discussion in the board on the future of the facility, and all of the partners in the MWA, with the exception of Australia, have now made their financial commitments going forward. So all of that is locked in, which is really good. Australia is not lagging behind because of lack of will. It's simply the fact that the current 5-year program under which Australia contributes its funding finishes in mid-2023. So we have Australian funding through mid-2023, and the Commonwealth Government in Australia is going through a process right now to roadmap what the next 5-year period looks like, mid-2023 to mid-2028. So at the moment, we're consulting and putting forward our case into that process. Just this week, an exposure draft came out for the government on the National Research Infrastructure Roadmap. It's really pleasing to see that radio and optical astronomy, both domestic and international, feature prominently in that roadmap. So it's looking good for post-2023. We would expect that roadmap is translated into an umbrella funding allocation in the next Commonwealth budget, which may happen somewhere between March and May next year. And just for context, we go to a federal election early next year in Australia, so the election budgets are always interesting. But assuming that allocation is made for the next 5-year period, the step following that will be to generate an investment plan in each of the investment areas, and one of those areas would be astronomy. So we will want to be part of that discussion as well. So bottom line is, it looks pretty good for post mid-2023. We've got a bit of work to do over the next 6 months or so to make sure that MWA features in that investment plan. Looks okay so far. In order to support our case, one of the things we're doing at the moment is engaging Ernst & Young to undertake a full economic and social impact assessment for the MWA project, going back of order a decade. So we've been working on that for a couple of months, and that's looking really, really good, actually. As you'd probably all expect. The scientific impact of the MWA is outstanding. But when you look at the economic impact, what we've spent in the regions with companies, with the people we've employed, and the things that we've done, the multiplier economic benefit throughout the economy, in particular the regional economy around Geraldton, is pretty significant. So that report's coming together really well. Should be available in around about January or February, and we'll certainly release that to everyone in the consortium as well. So you can see that we're taking steps to try and secure our financial and scientific future, and it's looking really good. I think the consensus view is that probably mid-2028 would then represent a pretty logical stopping point for the MWA project. In theory, the SKA should be coming along towards the end of the decade, and in theory should be operational by about 2030. So in theory, a transition from the MWA to SKA low around about end of 2028 seems to make sense. So we're not quite declaring that as the intent. I think it's the likely scenario, but given the error bar on the SKA itself, it is possible that the MWA may be required to push on past 2028. But it's a long way away and there's a lot of water under the bridge to get there. So at the moment, we're really focused on that 2023 to 2028 period. That only makes sense if we have a really significant new capability to exploit. The history of the MWA has been a history of constant renewal and constant incremental benefit through upgrades and new capabilities. So we need to keep on that path. The new correlator is a significant part of that. There's latent capacity and capability in that correlator that will be realised over coming years. And if we can couple that with new receiver systems, the inclusion of additional tiles into the array, and with the stretch goal of 256T by the end of 2023, that will set the MWA up for a really productive 5-year period. So that's my overview. All pretty qualitative, I know, but I wanted to give just some high-level reflections. And I didn't want to steal the thunder of the great talks that are yet to come. And I wanted to leave a fair bit of time for discussion. So I'll leave it at that. Mia, if there are questions or comments that people want to make now, we can go through those. We've got a bit of time. So back over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. That was really good. I think when we're so involved in the schedule and the rollout of what's happening, it can be hard to know what other people don't know. So I think being qualitative about it is a good thing. And everyone, please don't feel awkward about any questions that might seem obvious to us that they might not be. So Kath did have a question. Kath, I don't know if you want to ask it verbally or if you prefer I can read it out or if Stephen can see it himself.
I'm in the boardroom. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I had a question about the forward planning for reconfigurations. So if the plan is to move back into the extended configuration next year, and then new receivers will start coming on board, do you foresee that there will be another reconfiguration to the compact array for the EOR observing season, or do you just see that the array will build out in a hybrid fashion from that point?
Yeah, I jumped over it a bit when I said we'll see what the demand is like in the long baseline configuration. we've been in the short baseline configuration for a long time, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a really significant demand for long baseline observations with the new correlator. So given that it's a relatively small window between, say, May, June and the start of the EOR season, we'll just see how that long baseline demand stacks up relative to that window. If we can clear whatever demand we have by the start of the EOR season, I think we would do a reconfig back to the short baseline array so that we have that for the EOR season. I don't think banking on the receiver build out to satisfy a short baseline component of a non-configured array is probably a good strategy, because I think there's there's some technical risks there that you wouldn't want to promise that we could have an EOR capable array just by building out receivers. So, sorry, long answer, but we'll see how the long baseline demand is. And if we can accommodate that demand by the start of the EOR season, my preference would be to get back into the short baseline array and give the EOR team a full swing at the full season, given that you didn't get it this year.
Thank you. Yeah, just thanks for that, Stephen. That's great. Our follow-up comment is that the start of the EOR observing season, which often is in August, is usually not our best time anyway. And so even if we pushed another month or two and then got time to accommodate more long baseline, then that would still work well for us. So I'm sure there's a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, no, that's cool. For some reason, mentally, I have September as the start of the EOR season.
I think Ramesh also has a question.
As you can possibly guess, my question was also along the similar lines as that Kath has been wondering about. So essentially the same thing as that for projects like Smart Survey, which is heavily reliant on compact configuration, and to the best that is we can do and maximize the sensitivity by observing around the transit. So there may be some interesting constraints around that, because when we originally went for this science commissioning and completion of the Smart Survey, the hope was that maybe things will, it's a shared risk proposal. We knew that things may not necessarily go according to the plan. So if there are some opportunity that might be there down the path during the EOR season and the LST range, that might be of most important to us. And also factoring in, the constraints that might be there in the new system, which may not be as stringent or rigid as the legacy VCS. So those are the kind of information that might be really important for us in our forward planning. So my question to Stephen was basically, that there might be the other potential projects that would benefit from that sort of an opportunity that might be there.
Yep, if I've understood the question correctly. Yeah, so like I say, we've been in the short baseline array for a long time. The key consideration for staying in the short baseline array is to complete the notional coverage of the Smart Survey, which my understanding should be done sort of March, April. Chris can nod or shake his head or something if he...
That is actually not the case, Stephen. We had quite a bit of discussion around it, and because we are at a point that the LST range is quite constrained to 12 to 16. And some of them are just simply not observable during this January to March period. And even if we have to make some relaxation on our preference or constraints, it turns out that we might be able to do maybe a fraction of them, may not be all of them.
Okay, so in that, okay, so we'll discuss this offline, but sure. If that's the case, then we might bring forward the long baseline commencement, and you may have to wait a year to complete the smart survey or something. So we'll see in due course. Yeah, we'll work it through. If it's not the case that we can sensibly complete the smart survey, then we'll rethink that.
Thank you.
Were there any more questions from the boardroom or anywhere else? We're still ahead of time.
Tom makes an important clarification in the chat where he says that data rates and storage capacity will be a consideration. So I did note that Pawsey is changing its storage system, and the team's sort of in the middle of accommodating that while simultaneously getting the new correlator up and running. So of course, as we go to larger number of tiles, the data rates increase, and so we'll just have to carefully balance up the data rates and the storage capacity at Pawsey along with everything else. So it was sort of implicit in what I was saying, but Tom's right to make that explicit.
Well, I don't see any other hands up. We can pride ourselves on our efficiency and our brevity, but I think it's quite late for Chris at the moment, or quite early, depending on how you look at things. So if there's no other discussion, then perhaps we can just shift the schedule up about 20 minutes, in which case, Chris, feel free to start.
Cool beans. Thanks, Mia, and thanks, everyone. Yes, indeed. It is 1:36 a.m. here in Europe. So for those who don't necessarily know me, my name is Chris Risley. I'm your MWA Principal Scientist, and I'm a current research fellow at the University of Bologna in Italy. But my involvement in the MWA dates back to about 2016, when I moved from the UK to Perth and, jumped into the Australian radio community with both feet. This is going to be a tag team talk with Ben McKinley, who's there with you in Perth, who is your MWA Deputy Principal Scientist. I'm going to cover some of the MWA by the numbers and give you a little bit of a flavour of the science highlights from the past 6 months or past year. And then Ben is going to dive into all of the latest and greatest, coolest stuff from commissioning. So in terms of MWA science by the numbers, we're talking citation statistics and papers and whatnot here. So in the last 6 months since the last project meeting, we have had 16 MWA papers accepted. That's papers featuring MWA data, whether it's public data or whether they're collaboration papers. And we also have 8 collaboration papers submitted for peer review. I think there's been a couple more gone in the last couple of days since I submitted the board report. So getting a head start on next meeting's numbers. We have some new totals in terms of number of papers. We're getting to a really healthy number of papers in both collaboration papers and external papers. So 156 collaboration papers and 107 external papers. And the citation rates are growing really nicely. Again, in the last 6 months, we've had about 500 new citations to collaboration papers and a healthy growth in the citations to MWA external papers. And it's getting to the point now where the y-axis numbers start to look a bit funky in the plots that you get online. Again, big shout out to the EOR team for having so many papers in the top set of citations. So really the take home, if you want to take one thing home from this slide, and you're not particularly interested in the nitty gritty numbers, is that the citation and publication rates continue to grow really nicely. They're on par with the kind of rate of growth that we've had previously, despite the more challenging conditions we still find ourselves in. Okay, moving on to the fun stuff, the more fun stuff from my point of view, the science highlights. I've had to cherry pick again a few, so thank you to the science working group leads for providing some suggestions. I've dropped a bunch of plots and text into the following slides, like minimal text. So starting with the EOR, we've had a bunch of cool things in the last 6 months or so. there are sources in here. You might be able to see them because it's such a big area. But this is an image of the central region from the MWA lobes, the long baseline EOR survey paper from Christine Lynch. Paper 1 has been published and the data are all soon to be on Data Central. It's the deepest and most complete low frequency catalog for the southern EOR fields. And it's really important to achieve the goal of precision calibration for EOR analysis, which requires that like extremely high precision to achieve the big science goals. Similarly, earlier this year, we had Ruby Burns' paper on diffuse polarized foreground mapping with the MWA, again covering the EOR fields. If you know me in my science, you know I'm a polarization person, so it's really nice to see some more diffuse polarized mapping work come out of the MWA, because the MWA with all those short baselines is extremely sensitive to diffuse emission. So not only is this going to enable, again, improvements in the EOR calibration process, but it's also going to enable some really cool studies of polarized galactic foreground, which is a whole cool area of science that I don't do much about. And plenty of other highlights. We've had Aman Chokshi using OrbCom to map the MWA beam. We have Masa Rahimi and Shintaro doing EOR and cosmic dawn power spectra in a variety of different fields and at different frequencies. Using Hyperdrive and the MWAC, the BLE MWAC's preprocessing software, and a lot of the MWAC's commissioning data processing, which you will see later in Ben's talk. So EOR have been very busy, they've been hard at work and getting a whole bunch of cool stuff out. Okay, some highlights from the pulsars and fast transients group. I received this slide from Sammy McSweeney. I'm not a pulsar person, so I'm not going to pretend to understand too much of this, but essentially this is the second or third pulsar found in SMART. They've done a whole bunch of cool stuff using ADAC support to develop new interfaces for this. This is an extremely unusual pulsar, which exhibits a lot of nulling. There's a paper under collaboration review. They've done tons of follow-up work, and it's really cool and will allow the pulsar group to look at a whole bunch of detailed pulsar physics, which is just fantastic. And plenty of other highlights, as mentioned in Stephen's report earlier, the high time resolution mode commissioning of MWACs. Nick Swainston has found another new pulsar, as well as submitting a paper on the MWA multipixel beamformer. And then there's Dilpreet Kaur's paper on using MWA, UGMRT, and Parkes observations of a particular millisecond pulsar. So really, this shows us that the pulsars and fast transients group are really starting to dig into the wealth of data that's been gathered as part of the SMART survey. So we've reached the 6 months ago we were talking about the tip of the iceberg, and now the pulsars group are digging deeper into that iceberg and revealing all of this cool kind of pulsar stuff. In terms of the transients group, well, first up, the transients group has a new chair, Gemma Anderson, who's at ICRA Curtin. She has taken over the transients group and really grabbed the reins and hit the ground running. There's a paper from earlier this year by Gemma, which essentially demonstrated that the MWA's rapid response system is extremely capable of being on target within several tens of seconds of receiving the trigger, and has also shown success in getting triggers through with MWACs. In this case, there was no detection, but the capability has been very well demonstrated. Similarly, there's another paper by Chauhan et al. On studying jet ejector transients. Again, interesting complex physics at work. And finally, I couldn't mention transients without showing this plot from Natasha Hurley-Walker studying the GleamX ultra-long period magnetar, which you're going to hear about later. I just love this image she put together as a potential cover art, as it were. And plenty of other highlights from the transients group. There was the transients showcase earlier this year, which was the relaunch of the transients group, and it was hugely successful. We had 40 odd active participants. It ran on for the full 2 hours and actually ran slightly over. Discussion was fantastic and live and lively, and monthly meetings have launched and are becoming a success. And there's also a recent paper on space domain awareness by Prabhu et al. GEG science highlights. Well, again, GEG have been making lots of pretty pictures in the last 6 months. There's this one from Chenoa Tremblay, who has been continuing to study southern H2 regions in fantastic detail. This is an image of the nearby high mass star forming region, RCW 38. And it really shows that the MWA detects much of the same kind of structures that are seen in optical and IR, again, demonstrating that the MWA is a really good instrument to do radio studies and radio traces of star formation. And of course, I couldn't mention galaxy science without mentioning Centaurus A, this fantastic, gorgeous image from Ben McKinley's paper. It's a real exemplar case study of combining phase 1 and phase 2 data, which paper has been accepted in Nature Astronomy, and I think narrowly missed out on the important award of Astroplot of the Week on Twitter. And it may be coming soon to a stubby holder near you, so that's pretty cool as well. And GEG has had a lot of other science highlights, including SEDs of supernova remnants, using interplanetary scintillation observations to complete the LOFAR long baseline calibrator survey. And there's a paper by Stéphane Duchesne and collaborators, myself included, on the highly complex merging cluster Abell 3266, which is just, again, fantastic science work coming out of GEG. And finally, a couple of highlights from the SHI folks. There's a paper by Mondal and Oberoi where they presented snapshot imaging of type 1 solar storms. I don't know much about solar physics, but I know the SHI folks have been just doing some fantastic work here in unusual observation modes and high time resolution, high spectral resolution. So it's really cool to see. And similarly, very fast snapshot imaging of solar radio bursts from a paper by Mohan et al. By Mohan earlier this year. So you can see the rapid evolution of this particular solar radio burst in terms of how the brightness varies and where the burst goes. And the SHI folks have been hard at work with a whole bunch of other things, including follow-up of the WINKS, or the Weak Impulsive Narrowband Quiet Sun Emission, completion of the polarization component of their AirCars pipeline, and some really cool stuff that they have done recently as part of MWA's commissioning, including synchronized observations with the MWA and GMRT of the Parker Solar Probe perihelion approach. So that's some really cool stuff going on. We're looking forward to seeing what comes out of those data. So in summary, heaps of really cool science, both galaxies in the local universe, such as Cene, and distant galaxies. There's a paper that's been submitted on a redshift 6.4 quasar using MWA and other instruments to constrain the SED of this source over very, very broad wavelength ranges. Rare, unusual objects in our own backyard with the ultra-long period magnetar. The SMART survey folks are really digging into that data in a big way. Transients group is kicking into high gear, and there's tons of really cool SHI science studying a variety of emission modes, development of their algorithms, and a bunch more stuff. So, I said this 6 months ago, laissez les bon temps rouler when it came to phase 3. We're getting into phase 3 now, we're getting into the science commissioning, and it's a bit later than we might have originally liked, but things have happened, and we're in a really great position as we move into phase 3 to do some awesome science. And at this point, I will hand over to Ben for the latest on MWAC science commissioning. But seeing as we've got a bit of extra time, I'm happy to take some questions now if people want. And I will stop my share.
Any hands up? I do see that Gemma has shared a link to the results from the full MWA triggered sample on short GRBs by student John Tian. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh,
Are
yeah,
there any
fantastic to see
questions
that
for
paper
this?
was just accepted. So congrats, Jen.
All right.
I have a quick question.
Go on then,
I didn't.
Ben.
I didn't even know there was an Astro Twitter plot of the week. But who beat us?
That's a great question.
Who
So
comes second?
Astroplot of the Week actually only appeared a few months ago, maybe not even 6 months ago. So it's a relatively recent thing. I can't remember who beat us, but I was disappointed that they didn't go for the radio. But Sene, of course, got my vote.
All right, Ben, I think over to you.
All right, I will share my screen then. Oh dear. Oh, what? Oh, hang on. What? Oh. Apparently I need to allow Zoom to let me share a screen. Oh. Oh my goodness. Sorry. Let's talk amongst yourselves. Oh. Quit. I have to quit and reopen soon. Good thing we're running ahead of time.
Stuart just sent me some amazing old photos, which he might want to share. And he is currently muted.
Is this the one where Stuart's like welding something?
No, I couldn't find that one. But let's see if I open that. All right. Are you good, Ben, or do you want me to show these?
Ben is not quite back yet.
It's
Okay.
imperative that you show these photos.
All right. I think if I get this right. All right. This is T1 from 2004 with people from Haystack, as it was back then. And this is Frank detecting trams on Swanston Street with the first of the antennas. And there was I don't know if, so Jamie Stevens, people probably still know. And that's Dave Barnes, who's at Monash now doing data science. But those are, it took me a while to dig those out. I would have put them in your historical list. Yeah.
And look at those historical dipoles, the tall and skinny ones.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone is smiling as much as I am. I love these sorts of, these are my favorite part of everyone's presentations, when they do the slideshow of back in the day.
Yeah. Apparently this magnificent structure that I built, knowing nothing about electronics or radio astronomy, I built the base, but it was too bumpy. It caused them all manner of grief when they got to WA. Right, let's stop.
Yes, please, everyone send in photos. That would be fantastic. We could make a proper collage. All right, Ben, how are you feeling?
Okay, I can try again.
All right.
That was good to see Frank. He's my PhD supervisor. Oh my goodness. What just happened? You asked, oh, I am sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
You're showing your entire screen.
What a disaster. Okay, after that seamless transition, here is my amazing first slide. While we're talking about photos, I was digging through my old photos, and that's the oldest one I could find, even though I think I joined the project in like 2011, but this is 2013 in Wellington. Yeah, I remember that meeting. That was awesome. I think I wanted to move to Wellington after we got back. Yeah, so science commissioning, I sort of had it in my mind that sort of Randall and other people would have already spoken about what MWAX is and a bit of the details about it. And then we would move on to science commissioning, but I got that wrong. I didn't look at the timetable. So all the details of what MWAX is is going to come later, but basically we have a shiny new correlator that's better than the old one and can do all sorts of amazing things. But the real goals for science commissioning, so all the engineering commissioning has been completed, and the correlator works, and Randall will talk about that a bit later on. But so it was our job to sort of coordinate the science teams to look at the data and see if it meets the science requirements. And it wasn't all about testing all the bells and whistles of the new correlator, but more or less checking to see that we at least have the same capability as the legacy data, and that we're going to be able to do science with the new correlator, and it's going to give the science teams a bunch of data to play with and run through their pipelines and check if we see any major issues. And I can say that it's pretty much gone really, really smoothly, and we've had barely any hiccups and everything looks great. So, it's me again. So what we did for science commissioning was look at the TAC approved proposals. Okay. No, never mind. Oh. Yeah, we looked at so we had a call for proposals last year, and we were supposed to have the compact array from about May till June. But obviously that shifted with various things that happened. And so what we ended up doing for science commissioning was choosing a subset of those compact array proposals, and awarding the main limitation on the number of hours as well was the fact that the sort of data processing isn't all set up through ASVO and everything. So it takes a fair bit of manual stuff for Dev and others to get the data into a format that we can share with everyone. And we weren't sure about storage and everything like that. So we ended up awarding the EOR team 3 hours initially to look at the EOR 0 field at the 3 EOR frequency ranges. That was different to the initial proposal, which was to look at the galactic plane and CNA, but we actually obviously prefer looking at the actual EOR field, so it worked out quite well for EOR. And then we awarded Divya and the team 3 hours to look at the sun, and they have completed a really interesting shadowing of the GMRT, looking for heliospheric Faraday rotation. And so this was this observations have been completed, but we don't have any results from Divya yet about the data processing, but that's coming soon. The pulsars, we have basically said we'll want to provide Ramesh and the team with as much data as they need to verify that the VCS data looks good, and then to complete the SMART survey. And we've also activated the triggers from the proposals that involved transient triggering. We haven't had any real triggers yet, as far as I know, but we've done some, Andrew and the teams have done some testing, and it appears to be working in theory. So how do you get rid of, can't see my own slides. There we go. I'm a bit of a Zoom expert, as you can see. We haven't had enough practice. We've observed initially 3 hours, and then Andrew's actually scheduled another further 17 hours on the EOR 0 field. And now I think it's getting pretty low in the sky and hard to observe. So we've got as much EOR 0 in compact configuration as we can pretty much now. And so the next thing is to get the complete plan from Ramesh and the team about what to observe with the with pulsars, and we can also get some more solar data as well. So we'll move on to some actual results and some plots that people have sent through. So this is just some calibrator scans of 3C444 that I managed to calibrate an image. So these were pretty early UV fits files from Beerley, and Beerley can now give us measurement sets it couldn't at this time. So I did everything calibration imaging with good old Myriad. And yes, 3C444 is a dot that gets smaller as the frequency goes up. So that was a good sign. I won't bore you with calibration solutions and all that stuff, but it all looked fine. This is some cool stuff from Jack and Chris. So on the left here is Jack's software Woden, which simulates MWA data. So it's just a point source sky model that we use for calibrating the EOR field. That's been simulated with Woden and then imported as a measurement set with CASA and imaged with WS Clean. And then on the right is the actual EOR 0 field, one observation of the MWAX data run through Chris's new hyperdrive. And then, yeah, the calibrated UV gets imported to CASA and imaged with WS Clean. And if you look carefully, that's the EOR right there. Now, but you can see some actual diffuse emission that's in the real data and it's not in simulation. So anyway, it looks pretty good. And Kath has run it through chips to make power spectra. And this is a combination of 5 observations in the high bound for both polarizations. So you've all seen power spectra in these MWA meetings and can assure you that they look as good as the legacy data, and it's what we expect. So moving on to pulsars. So Sammy got an initial 10 minutes of observations on this pulsar, and it looks good. You can detect the pulsar in these pulse phase versus frequency plots. Sammy had to write some GPU-based code to mimic the legacy PFB, so you could actually run it through the pipelines and do a direct comparison with the legacy data. And the calibration was done using hyperdrive, transferring from a previous night's EOR 0 observation, and the results look good. And of course, I swore I would never do this in my career, but you have to show one of these presto plots every time you show a pulsar. And it's, I don't know if anyone understands any of that, but if you flash that up, it means that everything, you've detected a pulsar and it's looking good. So in summary, we can say that science commissioning is close to complete. I think once we get some confirmation from Divya that the solar data is looking good, and we do a bit more with the VCS, we can say that it's done and dusted, and that the correlator at least meets the requirements that to match with what we had before. Natasha requested some 0.25 second correlation data. So before we could only go down to 0.5, and we have this capability to go to 0.25 seconds now. And that actually fell over the first time that we tried that. But it, I think that is fixed now. I think Ian's fixed that up, so we'll try that again. So that was good. It's the first time we actually managed to break the system. So it's good that something actually went wrong. And so as Stephen said, the array will be in compact mode for early 2021. We're aimed to finish the smart survey, but if that's not possible, given the RA ranges that are available, then we might have to complete that next year or the year after. But because we'll be in the compact configuration and we don't have that many proposals, the EOR fields aren't available. If anyone has some great ideas about what you want to do, something cool we could do with the compact array, then let us know. We can put in a DDT proposal. And of course, when we switch to the longer baselines, there's going to be some things we need to test to make sure that the MWAX correlator is going to behave nicely with the long baselines and the different procedures and everything. So there may be some initial science commissioning observations before we start the main round of observations. And that is about all I had, I think. But yeah, I just want to say that all the hard work has been done by the engineering and the ops team, and you'll hear all about that soon. And yeah, it's just looking fantastic. I'm really excited to start using the new correlator, and I'm especially excited for these new receivers as well, because that's really going to change the capabilities of the MWA. It's going to be amazing. So thanks a lot, everyone, and I also will answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Ben. I think it was Greg who said the other day during one of the commission meetings that commissioning MWAX has been a bit like the duck, sort of sailing on the top of a lake, and what you don't see underneath is the legs paddling really, really, really hard. And the teams have done so well to get it up and running in the short time that it's been. So we will take questions. That was some excellent science commissioning talk, well, science talks, because that we're crawling back to the original schedule very, very slowly. I hope people feel free to just take your time, enjoy the ride with these talks. Chris can go to bed now if there's no questions. So I'm sure.
Never been praised for being so slow and being having such a kerfuffle before. So I'm glad I could be of assistance.
It's good for my stress levels as well. So no, this is quite enjoyable. Oh, I do have some more photos. I'm loving this whole contribution of photos. So these are from Brian Gainsler. I hope you can see them. I quite like this diagram that includes a Nobel Prize. This is from the project meeting in Bangalore in 2012. There is also, what else is he? This one is from the same meeting. Hang on, let me bring that over there. These are some familiar faces, which I'm sure you'll all know. This is from 2012 as well. This is the MWA board in 2010, looking fresh. I love it. I love it. Fantastic. Oh, and I think there is also the launch program from 2012. So landing at the site, this is still pretty much exactly what happens on site these days, honestly. Fantastic. If you have more photos you would like to share and send in, I will attach them all. Well, actually, I will ask first, but we do have a wiki page for these project meetings, and I can upload them there if people are interested and willing for that to happen. Whoops, the lights just went off in my room. Are there any more questions about the science talks before we move on? I don't think the raise hand feature has been used once throughout this meeting. Can we just confirm that it is available? Can someone raise their hand? I won't pick on it. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. At least I know you're still awake and paying attention. All right. Well, in that case, if Yajan and Jake, I believe you're next up. If you're ready, feel free to start sharing. Okay. If not, we can. Oh, there you are. Hello, okay. Yajan.
Okay, thank you, Mia. So I am very glad to share my experience on the phase 3 digital receiver. So I will share my slides here. So. On my slides, I will introduce the background and and then I will first introduce the ADC and FPGA board, and then I will introduce the design of the functions, including the firmware and software, and then the hardware integration. So and the most I will introduce the following work, and so. Before I introduce the MWA receiver, so I will introduce our experience on the digital backend. So this is the backend we have designed of our group. So from 22, and we are focusing on the VLBI backend, and including the astronomy, astrometry, and spacecraft tracking. And then from 2011, so we use our boards for the spectrometer and the FRB detection. This is the single dish, and now we are working on two boards for high speed sampling. So, and for the MWA receiver, last year we have a lot of meeting to discuss the requirements and the design. So as I know, this is the place where the receiver should be installed. So, and for the receiver itself, it will use the oversampled PFB and also have a compatible mode, the traditional critically sampled PFB, and also it will use the standard network packet. Now we use the UDP and IP. So also we have a much higher bit sampling and the rim buffer to capture the raw data from ADC. So I've mentioned that the science have share a paper. So, and also we want to have the strict spectral response. And this is the ADC board and ADC and FPGA board we choose. So it has 8-channel ADC and each has 12 bits. And also we use the FMC card to transfer the data by 10 gigabits, 10 gigabit or 40 gigabit. Also, we have 16 gigabytes DDR4 to capture the raw data. Also the processor, and we can put on Linux here, and it is very convenient for the MNC software. And in our design, we put two boards in each receiver. So and this is the generation of the sampling clock, the 10 megahertz reference, and have two stages of phase PLL, and then in the design we have a decimation tool to get the date. At the initial stage, we want to have two types of sampling clocks, but then but at last we just use one. Use this one, and the 655.36, and this is the ADC performance, and we are glad that they are all have the ENOB is larger than 8 bits. So, and for the function design, we have 4 layers of the design: the logic and the driver and the OS system and the MNC software. So the logic is the signal processing is on the logic, so including the PFB and digital game, and the channel select and the UDP payload, the UDP and the IP frame, and the data transfer and the ADC statistics. The drivers which communicated with the logic part. Here we use the GPIO and the block ROM and register and the SPI bus and the server port. And the OS, we use the Science Peter Linux tools, and including the GCC and Python environment, we can code in very easily. And the MNC software, we design a web server for control and monitor. So the logic design, the PFB, we put 8 PFB modules one FPGA chip. So also we share the filter coefficients to save the resources. The UTP payload, we have 192 channels totally, and alternatively to a FIFO, and the data rate is about 4 gigabit. And we use the 10 gigabit Ethernet to transfer the data, and also the statistics. This is the web server. We have two ways to access the web server. The first one is the REST API from MWA's documents, and we can send the command by Ethernet, and it will get the response. And also we can access the web server by IE browsers, and this is the example, and we can access the web browser and get the information very easily. We can get the status of the receiver, including the voltage and temperature, and also the 8 ADC histogram, and also the 8 spectrums, and also we want to set the output by the web server, and this part is to be updated. And the hardware integration, totally we have 2 ADC and FPGA board and 2 ASC modules to support 1 gigabit switch, and also the 10 megahertz and PPS splitter, the power supply. And this is the front panel and the back panel. We have two ports for debugging, and the signal is the signals are all on the back panels, and for the temperature of the FPGA and ARM temperature, I think the thermal equilibrium temperature is about 65 degrees on the environment, which the temperature is 23. So. And also we for the EMC we have a lot of tests and step by step. The first one is the ADC and FPGA board, and then we put it on a shielding cover, and also we have two versions of the shielding cover, and also we put them together in the prototype, and also a second prototype. And the following work, and I think the most important thing is the troubleshooting during the test, and then we will design the VIN buffer. We will put the 8 ADC each with 8 bit to the DDR, and the total data rate is 42 gigabits per second, and the trig, and I think the paper you have shared earlier. It is very helpful for us to design the part, and now we are trying to design the data stream from DDR to 10 gigabit Ethernet, and I think after the VIN buffer is finished, I think we can send the prototype to MWA for the on-site testing, and then I think maybe in the next year we will design the oversampled PFP mode, and the code is from Jake, and And we are planning to update this module and to share the coefficients. Also, there are small changes between the critical PFP mode. The data stream is from 2 to 4 to 4. And by the way, I am very happy to work with the MWA team, and I think we will keep it up. And finally, I will this is a picture of our team. So we have seven persons, and this is me. And thank you all. And welcome to Jack's report about the test. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yajan. We are also very happy to work with you. You make things so easy for us, and the results are brilliant. So I think Jake also has something to talk about the new receivers.
Yes. Thanks, Yajan. Yeah, the progress you're making on the new receivers is very exciting, and I can't wait to get my hands on one.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me just share my screen. So today I'm going to be giving a short overview of just the verification and testing plan for the new prototype receiver, and to present some of the initial test results we've gotten so far. So to recap, an MWA receiver can be reduced to a number of core components. That is the analog signal conditioner, which amplifies and then filters the signal prior to digitization. And then we have the timing and synchronization system, which in turn drives the analog to digital converter. This system is critical in order to have a coherent sampling of each signal. And next is the polyphase filter bank, which channelizes the data. Initially, we'll be developing it will be cloning the existing receivers with a critically sampled PFB, and in the future moving towards an oversampled PFB. And then finally, there's the data transmission step. And not to forget, the monitoring and control system is also critical in order to actually control the receiver and collect the telemetry that we need. So each of these components needs to be tested and verified thoroughly before we can be confident enough to deploy the receiver to the MRO. And so we have developed a plan to do a range of tests that verify each of these components. Namely, we want to measure a range of characteristics for the analog signal conditioner. These include measuring the gain versus the configured gain. We want to measure the frequency response of the anti-aliasing filter by just doing a sinusoidal sweep across the full band. We want to measure the nonlinear characteristics of the signal conditioner. So like the 1 dB compression point and the third order intercept, this should help us understand how it performs in the presence of RFI or strong signals. Next is the timing and synchronization. We want to validate that there are coherence between multiple RF inputs. This can be done by just injecting a common signal and correlating them together, making sure that they actually correlate. We also we're introducing a new feature for a programmable delay in the new receivers. So at the moment, each new receiver needs to have a very specific optical fiber length for the connected to them between the correlator building and the receiver. And so this removes the need to have fibers of very specific lengths. We can just program the delay in. And so we can do that by programming a delay and then measuring the delay between two input signals. We want to measure the polyphase filter bank performance by doing just a basic single tone test. We want to do a noise integration test. So for example, integrating noise for up to 100 hours or so. And then we want to measure the frequency response of the PFB by just doing another sinusoidal sweep. And finally, for the data transmission, we just need to inspect that the packets are constructed correctly with the correct header information and measure the rate of packet loss. So this is just a subset of all the tests we can do. There's a lot more that we need to test as well, but the process of carrying out these tests should help with the identification and resolution of any problems along the way. So our colleagues from Xiao have set up a remote testing platform that gives us the ability to remote control all parts of the signal chain. So we have a signal or noise generator and noise generator, which is connected to the prototype receiver, which is the device under test. And it's then in turn connected to some networking equipment and data capture servers that we can remotely control. So this allows us to inject various signals into the receiver and capture the resulting data and telemetry that we need. So one of the first initial tests we did was to do a single tone test. And this is just, although it's a very basic test, a lot has to be going right in order to get this result. So it actually confirms that a number of things are working. For example, the PFB has to be working in order to get this result. The channel index and mapping, so we saw the tone in the correct channel. The frequency alignment, so we set a specific frequency of our input signal and it appears to be the correct frequency. And it also means that all of the data transmission and UDP packet networking stuff is all working too. And so the next test we did was just a short noise integration test. In the future, we want to do a 100-hour test, but this is just a few seconds really. But as you can see, the measured spectral response roughly matches what we expect. So this is the critically sampled PFB that we're replicating here. And so you might actually notice there's a massive spike in the middle. So that's a DC offset due to the rounding scheme that's being used. So at the moment, we're just throwing away the smallest bits, which is effectively just applying a floor function, which results in a DC offset. So this is a prime example of the sort of subtle error that this test campaign is designed to identify, and we'll be fixing that in the future by applying a proper rounding scheme. So moving forward, so up to this point, we've just done some very basic tests and the receiver is still very much in development. And once verification and testing is complete, we want to deploy the receiver to the MRO for further testing and integration with the rest of the MWA. So this diagram is just an example configuration of how we might have the receiver set up on site and connecting them to a few long baseline tiles and integrating it with the existing MWAX correlator. And of course, in the future, we'll be upgrading the polyphase filter bank to an oversampled one and adding a voltage ring buffer for high time resolution data capture. So that's all from me. Any questions?
Thanks so much, Jake. There's nothing I can see happening on the chat, but yeah, for those that don't know Jake, he's been with us at Cairo for years, and he is truly a quiet achiever. The running joke is that you can never get him to shut up, but he's brilliant, and I'm so glad you're on this project in particular with the Xiao team, because it's just progressing so incredibly well, and these results are just proof of that. So all the receiver testing is flooding back to me from back in the days when I used to do those things. And that just reinforces, I'm very glad you're now taking the lead on this project. So have we got any questions maybe from the boardroom, the group there? No?
A quick one, if you can.
Oh yes, I can, Ramesh, but there is a bit of feedback, so I'm not sure where that's coming from.
No, no. Sorry.
I just noticed that maybe I have. So a lot of this initial testing and development, Jake, you are doing with this critically sampled mode, and I think my understanding, whether it is correct or not, is the plan is to have like so once you have moved to like oversampled PFP mode, to have these two that can be toggled back and forth, or is it like a turn off one and then once all the verification is complete? I'm assuming that that the reason why this is done critically sampled just to have like more rigorous testing between the current legacy receiver with this new one.
So the oversampled mode, so we'll have a critically sampled mode first, and then at some point we'll switch over to the oversampled mode, and that will be a big event or transition. And so yeah, that it's not like we'll switch between one and another mode regularly. I didn't really catch the second part of your question there.
Okay, so maybe I was confused. I was under the impression that there will be at some point that test from oversampled PFB mode and a critically sampled PFB mode will need to be like checked back and forth. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's not really relevant. I was assuming that there is some important rationale why critically sampled PFB is tested first and then moving on to oversampled one later on.
We can't co-observe with the existing RR receivers with the oversampled PFB.
That is it. Thanks, Jay.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions? Feel free to pop them into the chat. Even if we don't get to them now, we can always answer those at a later time. I've got some more photos, which I know everyone loves. So let's look at this one from Stephen. And what I love in particular about this photo is this old logo up here. And I might steal that for my signature, MW. That's excellent. We also have from Ben McKinley. Ben might want to speak to these ones, but this is from 2014 in Tempe. Am I saying that right? He's just said, Danny's crazy drone. And then another one from the same meeting in 2014, his hire bike after he got hit by a car at a four-way stop, which is quite impressive. Were you okay after that, Ben?
I couldn't see them when you put it. Could people see them? Maybe my Zoom is failing again.
Okay.
But,
oh, my apologies.
no, maybe it's just, I don't know. There's not much to explain. Yeah, I went for a ride on my bike and got hit by a car.
Well, thank you for sharing. I do have a bunch from Andrew, but that can possibly wait. That looks like the original deployment photos. So we can all get hyped for that, and please feel free to send in more. So in the meantime, if Randall is ready, we can move to the next part in our signal chain and talk about the new correlator that we have.
How's that, Mia? Can you see that?
I can see that. I can hear you.
Excellent. Okay. Well, firstly, I'll say thanks to Yajun and Jake for the excellent context setting and update there. So I'm very happy to have Jake and Yajun talk about the work that they're leading. This talk is mostly about MWACs and is really the work from Brian, Ian, and Greg, and with the help of the MWA operations team over quite a few years now. So I'm really reporting this on their behalf. It's been a fair long road to the upgraded correlator. And I was looking back through my slides preparing this talk, and we were talking about this back in October 2014, and then in the June 2016 meeting, there was a full-on session talking about our phase 3 aspirations and all of the things that we wanted to fix with the MWA and all of that kind of stuff. And there's the slide in the bottom left there is actually the slide that was like a summary of it. The issue with all of this has been that we've had a hard-coded signal chain, or a hardwired really signal chain for since the beginning of MWA, and breaking that, unhardwiring that has been the key to moving forward with our expanded signal chain, and also simultaneously the hardest thing to do. So cracking this nut has been difficult, and congratulations to everyone involved, because the nut has cracked, and I think that now unlocks a really bright future. Since we're doing nostalgia, here's some nostalgia for you. This is a tile back from before the MWA was even at Bulati. This was when it was the MWA wide field array. So this is 2005, I should say. So I think this was the first ever tile that was built on site, the MWA site back then. You can see very high tech with solar panels and heat shielding on the beamformers here. And this was all pretty low tech. In fact, I should say there's a trigger warning on the next photo for Stephen, so you might want to look away, Stephen, or just have your Valium now, because this was all built out of this this thing that was the precursor. So let's call it Donga Mark 0 or Donga version 0. This was all of the gear. It all went back to this this caravan. You can't really see it, but there's some cables coming in through a hole that we drilled in that was drilled in the wall of this caravan. Inside it was nothing. It was luxury, all luxury. Here's a photo of the gang inside. And the actual correlator, since we're talking about correlators, this is actually the very first MWA correlator. In fact, that's the very first entire MWA signal chain. So analog filters and mixers on the top, and the famous Stromlo streamer, which is the data capture sampling device, and it was all correlated in this very high performance desktop computer. So this was it. This is our shielded container, as you can see there, very, very high tech. So that was, there you go. I hope Stephen's okay there in the boardroom. We'll move on a little bit. The actual correlator for MWA is also a pretty long story, or at least the version, phase 1 version. It was all meant to be an FPGA based correlator. This is 32 T days where we have a test system in the lab, and as you can see, it's held together by sticky tape and cardboard. This, I'm not quite sure where this one is in the history of things, but anyway, it's a good bowl of spaghetti there. 32T, for those of you who are involved in it and remember it, was an endless series of fires and disasters to deal with. So this was after, I'm not sure what it was, a mini tornado or something like that ripped through the site. I think this is 2009-ish. So thankfully, this particular one made a mess, but and it also blew the donga off its footings. I'm not sure if many people know this, but the donga was blown off its footings, and all of the fiber optic cable that we had running back to the control room was sitting under the donga. And it was spared being crushed by about 0.5 centimetre by just pure luck. It would have been an absolute disaster. Anyway, moving on to the actual correlator. So this is the 32T correlator being installed into the Telstra hut. And by folks who are long since moved on from MWA. All right, so that's enough. That's enough nostalgia. But anyway, we'll keep moving on. So that's the 32T days of MWA. Things got better since then. This is also a photo or a slide that I stole from the 2016 talk, just outlining what I was talking about before with the hardwired signal paths in the old phase 1 MWA. So there was two parts of the signal path that were hardwired and made it very difficult to make any kind of modifications. The connections here were sort of a bespoke protocol, and the fine PFBs, did 10 kilohertz or nothing. And so we had machines that doubled as voltage capture devices of the 10 kilohertz channels, and also media converters that turned the data into standard Ethernet packets that went on to the old correlator. And since we're talking about the old stuff as well, I should acknowledge there was some some heroic efforts, in particular by Steve Ord, to get this original phase 1 correlator up and running in a very short period of time. Oops. Okay, so this is also stolen from 2016. There was a phase 3 concept. Really, all this block diagram is saying is that we want to try and move towards a standard signal path that's really common for many low frequency telescopes these days. So I won't dwell too much on this. Where we are is in this block diagram here. So we have our existing tiles and existing receivers. Those old servers that were previously called, well, some of the old ones and some new ones that were previously called the VCX boxes are now repurposed to be purely a media converter box that catches our bespoke data protocol out of the receivers and turns it into Ethernet packets. And now this all goes through a monstrous big switch through to the correlator boxes, where both the F and the X part of our FX correlator are implemented. The switch, of course, provides the bulk of the big corner turning, which is actually the hard part of how you do correlation. Corner turning is the hard part. But I've sort of intentionally labeled the size of the pipes going into and out of these switches. There's quite a lot of data. This switch really handles quite a lot, and it actually channels all of the data back through the switch and into the data cache at Curtin. So we might hear a little bit more about that later on. I'm not going to talk about the archive, but this signal chain is, represents the major rearrangement, the major unhardwiring of compared to the phase 1 and 2 systems that I talked about. The other part that's almost a little addition on this here, but it's actually the most important part of this signal path, is that at this point we have coarse channels flowing into a switch that go through to our correlator nodes, and now we can add additional future signal paths here, and that includes new receivers and so on. So this now allows us to start working on the aspirations that we've had for quite some time to move beyond 128 tiles and to start incorporating newer receivers and different receivers into the system. Okay. So briefly, what's new and what's not? This is the current status of things. Things are going to change over the coming year. The old fine PFBs, which were in the plot that the slide from a couple of slides ago, they're gone. They're out to pasture. I'm not actually sure where they are, but hopefully they've gone off to pasture in digital heaven. The coarse channels are the same as the ones that have always been flowing through the system. They're generated by the receivers, the in-field receivers. It's now straightforward to capture coarse channels, and we don't need to invert. Well, in principle, we don't need to invert fine PFBs. The wiki has quite a lot of documentation on the the operation and the modes that are available in the new correlator. So I'd encourage you to go and check it out. And if there's information missing or not clear or whatever, please just let us know. But it's the state of documentation is really good. What's not new, the dreaded course channel bandpass edges are here. Well, they're here for the present, at least. We know we want to get rid of them. In the future, we'll be applying fringe stopping, and that will allow for much more flexible time and frequency averaging settings. But for now, we still need to consider the time and bandwidth decorrelation effects, just like with the old correlator, when you're considering all of the potential time and frequency averaging modes. Okay, so in terms of verifying this, the thing that we did first, and I think was the most valuable, was directly capture data from the old and the new correlators running in parallel. And these plots show, I'm not sure which one's new and the old. I guess the point is that they're almost identical, but it's, I think, new and old raw data from the old correlator and the new correlator. And if you look very carefully on these plots, you can see that the shapes are virtually identical. I'll quantify how virtually identical they are in a second, but basically this test was the first thing that gave us some really good reassurance that it is operating as we expect. If we zoom in on a comparison plot, this is how virtually identical the outputs are. We don't expect them to be perfectly identical because we're not doing the fine PFB in hardware anymore, and so it is not an identical signal chain, but it's as close as we can do. And you can see from these plots that we are generating the same data plus or minus quantization errors. So Ian dug into this some more and made some comparison plots of the old versus new visibilities, and if everything's working correctly, these should lie on a perfectly straight line, which they do. Ian can tell you about a small, I guess, sign convention error that was found in the process of this, but it was on the XY correlations within the same tile, so I don't think anyone cares. But basically, these are very, very good comparisons. And we can look at the differences between the legacy and new correlators. The values, we don't expect them to be identical because the quantization is different. But if we compare, so this is the autocorrelations and MWAX amplitudes of the autos versus, and this is the difference between the old and the new. These numbers are quite small compared to the actual values. And this curvature and offset from zero here, it can be completely explained by the additional quantization and limiting that happens in the old fine PFBs versus the new MWAX. So this all looks great. Same sort of effect with the cross correlations. No alarms here. This small curvatures at the end can be completely understood by clipping type effects. Okay, that's all I want to say there. One significant difference compared to the old correlator is channel averaging. So the old correlator, again, we had the fine PFB, which generated 10 kilohertz fine channels, and that was it. And any other frequency averaging that was going on was actually done after the correlation, and it was just done by simple addition of, or averaging, I should say, averaging of channels together. So if we wanted 20 kilohertz, we would average these two channels together. If we wanted 40 kilohertz, we would average all four of these together. And this had the side effect of effectively moving the center frequency of the averaged channel compared to where the center frequencies of the original fine channels were. So this was, I guess, an unintentional side effect that we understood and dealt with in Cotter. The channels were assigned correctly. But in MWAX, the averaging is being done more correctly in the sense that the 10 kilohertz channels are basically done. Okay, no, sorry, I'll take a step back. In MWAX, the fundamental signal chain processes all of the data down to 200 hertz ultra fine channels. Okay, so this allows a fair amount of flexibility in terms of the channel averaging, and also has some other benefits in terms of the fringe stopping and things like that. But in order to get the final output channel sizes from MWAX, we need to be averaging some chunk of these 200 hertz ultrafine channels together. So with 10 kilohertz, we've deliberately done the averaging such that we get the same actual central frequencies of the 10 kilohertz fine channels. But for the other averaging, we've elected to center the average on what would have been the center of one of the other fine channels, and do this what I would consider to be more correctly. So for people who previously had a 20 or 40 kilohertz data, the center of your channels will be moving a little bit compared to what you expect, but they will be more correct. Okay. We wanted to, this is a checklist of all of the visibilities that we looked at in detail, comparing the old and the new correlators. We wanted to fill this entire checkerboard here with ticks, but in the end, it's a lot of data, especially the 1 kilohertz data. Seriously, I don't recommend looking at 1 kilohertz unless you really need to look at 1 kilohertz. But yeah, anyway, we went through all of these combinations of frequencies and frequency resolutions, doing a very detailed comparison and to show that it was the same, and or at least the same as we expect it to be. And I'll just also give a nod to Dev and Greg, because the rapid development of BLE and MWA Lib was a huge help with this. Okay, so here's some 1 kilohertz MWA autocorrelations in all of their glory. And I think yep, okay, last slide. So we're up and running. Thanks and congratulations to everyone involved. It was really pretty painless. The new servers, yeah, I forgot to mention also that the new servers were made possible by the funding secured by Melanie last year. So none of this happens without the money. The new servers are in. The old fine PFBs have been put out to pasture. The old VCS machines now act as media converters, and we have a signal chain that is very much reminiscent of many other low frequency telescopes now, and allows us a lot of flexibility in changing things and adding things and so on. And the new MWAX has a different, much more flexible way of doing the channelization, averaging, and so on. And we've removed the DC channel issue and implemented many more time and frequency averaging options. And that's all, so I can stop there.
Thanks so much, Randall. That was an excellent summary. I think we have a question, perhaps. Do the old EDT cards still work? I believe they have been repurposed for the Metcon servers, the media conversions. Yes, Brian is onto it.
They are the same ones.
That's right.
They are the same ones. They must be way out of warranty by now. I'm surprised they work at all.
We show them photos of you every now and then, Steve.
Yeah, you have to pat them on the head every now and again just to keep them happy. Oh, wow. Okay.
We could possibly talk more about that. We do have some time. I know Stephen and as Randall mentioned, the old receivers and the old correlator have been running as close as possible to 24/7 as we could get them for the last decade or so. So it's pretty amazing. It's a miracle really that it and the people involved have not completely fallen apart yet. And I don't even have a strong history with the old correlator, but I remember being sad that we were going to be effectively killing it, and Brian comforting me, saying that it was just going to a farm upstate where it could, you know, be free and play with all the other old correlators. And for the old fine PFBs, I do believe technically on paper they're in e-waste, but I do think Andrew Williams wants one to have in the corridor that he can kick every time he walks past it. So to answer that question, do we have any other questions for Randall after that excellent correlator talk? Pixie's got a raised hand.
Hi, I was wondering about the removal of the DC channel and if that shifts the fine frequency centers at all, and or if that's accounted for in the weighting of the averaging, and how.
Yeah, I was just waiting to see if Ian wanted to chime in, but no, it doesn't, because we're actually using an odd number of channels to do the averaging so that it's still centered, and the two edge ones are weighted at 50% so that we weight it all up properly.
We do have all of our correlator software engineering experts on the call as well. So if there are any more questions, feel free to ask them as well as Randall, because I know everyone loves getting into the technical details.
While you're waiting for questions, Ian, I'm just going to add to Randall's answer there that with the DC offset in the new correlator, we can deal with it by just removing the very center ultrafine channel. So we only lose 200 hertz of data, and then we already we compensate, we renormalize for that center channel of the coarse channel where we remove that DC bin. So all the channels are normalized again. So we don't have to lose a whole 10 kilohertz channel anymore. We retain all the channels across the band.
Well, thanks for that, Ian. It doesn't look like we're getting any more questions, so we can move on if everyone's okay with that. Our next talk is about Beely, which is the rust replacement for Cotter. It's the pre-processing pipeline that has been under development for the last year by no other than Dev Null, or as they are on paper, Derwent McElhenney, and I'm sure I've screwed that up even though I practiced. Sorry, Dev, please take it away. Sorry, technical difficulties. This would be a really good time for that elevator music again. Hum. It's all right, we're just getting back online. We can talk more correlator if anyone's got a question. The people in the boardroom would be pleased to know that some morning tea is being served out in the lunchroom, which you are free to grab. We do have a break just after Dev's talk, but you know, it could be gone by then. You'll never know. Better safe than sorry. Go get something now. All right, we're going to cut to a break now and give everyone, give Deb some time to sort out Zoom. So we shall meet back here at 10:20. Thank you so much. I'll just pause the recording until then, and I'll pop it in the chat. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We can get started now that Dev can share their slides. That was a very timely break, actually. So I see that there's a nice introduction slide, so I'll leave that to Dev, and over to you.
Thanks, Mia. Sorry about the technical difficulties there, folks. Friendly reminder, never rely on Wi-Fi for anything, ever. The Wi-Fi decided to kick me off the network as soon as I pressed the share screen button. But anyway, I'm here. My name is Derwent, or Dev for short. My pronouns are they, them. And I'm a developer here at ICRA Curtin / Kyra, as well as Oz SRC. And I'm going to be doing a bit of a deep dive into the software stack that is going to be used to process the next generation of MWA data. So a bit about me, promise it's relevant. A few of you have probably heard this story before, but yeah, I've been an astronomy enthusiast since high school when some folks from the SKA did some outreach at my school and inspired us with all the incredibly ambitious projects that they were designing at the time. That's what inspired me to do physics and computer science at uni. Turns out I'm a lot better at programming than astronomy. So I ended up taking a brief detour in the software development industry as a consultant. But at the start of this year, I joined Kyra in a position funded by Oz SRC, where I get to help out the MWA EOR team as part of an SKA design study. So I can quite literally say this is my dream job. So this is the picture that I'll be building up to today. I'm going to be talking about the software we're developing to pre-process the GPU box and benefits files from the new MWAX correlator on the left here into usable astronomy formats on the right. So if you're used to downloading your UV fits and measurement sets from ASVO, then this process will probably be not something that you have to think about much, but there's actually quite a lot going on in the background, and maybe this talk will help you appreciate how straightforward ASVO has made things. So continuing on with the nostalgia theme that we have going, here is a bit of an MWA software timeline. Bear in mind, this is where I started, I joined Kyra. So this information is basically just what I've been able to piece together. I could totally be wrong about some of this stuff, but do correct me or maybe tell us an interesting story at the end of questions if you were there for some of this. So Cotter is the tool that most of the MWA collaboration uses to pre-process what we now refer to as legacy correlator data, that's pre-MWAX. The vast majority of it was written in C++ by the prolific Andre Elfringer, who you may remember from such classics as AO Flagger and WS Clean. From the commit history, most of the work done on Cotter was done between 2012 and 2016. But then things naturally slowed down when Andre went off to go do amazing things at LOFAR. Some of Cotter's code can trace its origins all the way back to the now deprecated MWA tools and 32T tools repositories. So as you can tell from the name, those have been around since the days of the 32 tile prototype that we were showing some photos of before. So those repositories were written in C and Python by far too many people to list. It would probably be quicker to list the people at Kyra who were around at the time, at some point in the last decade, and haven't contributed to the MWA tools repo. But here's a list anyway. Given that half the audience has contributed, I should probably choose my words carefully. But MWA Tools wasn't without its quirks, and in writing Coda, Andre vastly improved the experience for anyone trying to pre-process their data, going from what was quite a chaotic collection of heterogeneous C and Python source into a pretty fast pipeline that worked pretty well most of the time. Let's fast forward a couple of years. The plans for the new MWAX correlator have been drawn up. It's now funded, but there's a slight problem. The new correlator has a very different output format, which means Coda needs to be updated to work with it. But the only person who knows how to do this has gone to work on a different telescope in a different country. And in the short time that he had to work on it, there wasn't much time to focus on tests and documentation or making the code maintainable. And correlator output formats are no walk in the park. And with the complex correlator logic spread out throughout the repo, the first thing that needed to happen was to abstract away some of the correlator passing logic into its own well-documented module. So that is what Greg and Chris, Greg Sleep and have been started working on in 2019. So this is MWA-lib, the one true library for reading all kinds of MWA data. It's fast, it's well written, it's got great tests, great doco, has Python and C bindings that work well. It has a full CI/CD pipeline with coverage analysis, cross-platform tests, and it's memory safe, but it wasn't always this way. You see, MWA-lib started off its life written in C, but at some point early on in development, Chris introduced Greg to a language called Rust. It's just as fast as C and C++, but unlike those languages, it's actually memory safe. It's way easier to do testing and documentation, and it's just a really good language choice for a library that needs to be solid as a rock. By the way, rewriting things in Rust is now so common that it has its own name, oxidation, which I'm sure gets a giggle out of anyone who is familiar with chemistry. Back to the timeline, around about 2020, with the development of MWA-lib going smoothly, the next projects to benefit from this wave of oxidation were Chris Jordan's Hyperdrive, a highly modular calibration and simulation package, and Hyperbeam, the Rust implementation of the MWA FEE beam code. And this is about the time that I joined Kyra and started working on BLE. So BLE can be summed up in 4 words. It's oxidized cotta for MWAX. It's named after the word for lightning in the language of the traditional owners of the MRO site, the Wadjuri Yamachi mob. I was inspired by the fact that there was an outage of the MWA around the time that I started, which was caused by lightning activity in the atmosphere, inducing an obscene amount of current in the cables going into the receivers, simply because of how much distance the cables cover. This kind of interference is something that the RFI flagging in BLE is designed to mitigate, but the main reason for the name is simply that BLE is fast. The goal is to eventually have feature parity with Cotta, but right now BLE can already read legacy and MWAX correlated data using MWA-lib, convert these to UV fits and measurement sets, perform cable delay and geometric corrections, as well as RFI flagging using AO flagger, and more features coming soon. So this isn't simply a cut and paste job though. Sure, it's a different language, but there has been a concerted effort in BLE's development to make things as correct and maintainable as possible. We do this through good planning, rigorous testing, continuous integration, and other modern software development practices that I'll get into. Because the BLE team has decided to value correctness and maintainability over speed, this has an influence on how we plan and prioritize our work. For example, there are many things that we can do to make BLE even faster and use even less resources, but this optimization work isn't going to happen until the minimal viable set of features is complete and well tested. But even without a lot of optimizing, BLE still performs well in benchmarks, being about 20% faster than Cotta. This is an example of how much power Rust gives you out of the box without having to get into the weeds too much. So I believe the real benefit in oxidizing Cotta this way is that we can have a close look at exactly what Cotta is doing and whether it's actually still correct. We found several defects in Cotta which have gone unnoticed for almost a decade, and these These range from being benign errors in fits keywords that no one uses to rare edge cases that cause flags to be written into the wrong time steps. Very rare edge cases, but still, nonetheless, nothing to panic too much over. No sufficiently complicated software is without defects, but in being transparent about our process for surfacing and documenting and permanently fixing defects with tests, users can have more confidence that Beely is correct. So here's how planning works in Beely. We have weekly project meetings with the stakeholders, which is Kath and Randall and Greg and Chris, where we prioritize epics, stories, and tasks in Jira. And we also make sure that before we start working on a task, we make sure that the value is well described in Jira. The context, the scope, acceptance criteria are written and shared, and we make sure that we agree on all of the acceptance criteria before any work starts on a ticket. Testing in Beely is also, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. So there's obviously correlated data can be quite large, and it can be so large that it doesn't fit into a GitHub repository. So there had to be a little bit of innovation to come up with a way of generating synthetic test data that was representative of correlated data and functions the same and is seen the same by everything that is pre-processing it, but actually fits inside a GitHub repository. So there are some scripts in the Beely repo that generate this data for testing, and anyone who processes correlated data might be able to find these synthetic test data interesting and use them in their own repositories. Another thing that we do well in Beely is continuous integration. So every time a code change is pushed, all of the entire code base is tested through a very exhaustive test suite that gets run on multiple platforms, multiple operating systems. And in doing these tests, we're calculating also which lines of code are being accessed, and we collect all of this information into what's called a coverage report to make sure that we're not missing any large parts of the code base that haven't been tested properly. This makes sure that, so that everything is tested adequately. Another challenge that we've had with Beely is if you want to test that the functionality, you need to be processing quite a lot of data. And so I've set up a GitHub Actions agent, which is on an HPC cluster that runs Beely on full-sized test data. And it takes several hours to go. And it also benchmarks how long it takes to process data in various different configurations. So it makes sure that not only are the unit tests working, but a full test of the entire system happens as well. And we also check that the benchmark performance isn't regressing every time we make a change, because that's important that we don't introduce a new change that severely reduces our performance. So I'll just quickly skip through the features that exist in Kotter that have not yet quite been implemented in Beely yet, but are coming very soon. So soon we'll have spectral and temporal averaging, .bin calibration files, the ability to apply .bin calibration solutions before or after averaging. And these are the Andre calibrate file format. And we'll also be able to configure resource limits, like limiting the number of RAM, the amount of RAM or the number of cores, as well as being able to flag edge channels. That's a really simple one, but it just hasn't been done yet. time steps as well, really simple, and correction of PFP passband, and arbitrary phase center configuration. So be able to phase to the tile pointing center or the phase center of the observation or any RA deck. So now I'm going to talk about MALU. So like Beely, it's also named after a Wurundjeri word. We've chose the word MALU, meaning kangaroo. It's a little bit tenuous, but the purpose of MALU is a container for all of the code that is common between Beely and Hyperdrive. So there's a lot of things like coordinate transformations, processing mutation, aberration, all those fun things. Jones matrices, file IO, like measurement set, creation, measurement set, reading and writing, UV fits, reading and writing, all thanks to the excellent Rust package called Rubble. So we kind of wrapped all of this stuff up together, all this common code, added the tests that we both individually written, and also some new tests as well. And this Rust crate is also very extensible in that it doesn't actually require MWA lib to function. So you can use it if you want fast IO for various different astronomy file formats. You can actually use it to for telescopes that aren't even MWA. But there is a lot of extra convenience functions for MWA that kind of take your MWA lib context object and do a lot of nice things. So there's a lot of ergonomics there for MWA people, but it is not necessarily strictly required to be MWA. Yes, it's still in development, but it is usable, and it is being used by Beely and Hyperdrive for that common code, and it is also much like the other repos, very well tested. Yeah. So that's the full. This is the full timeline. I just thought it was interesting that we've got a bit of code on the left here from the original commit history is kind of lost to the sands of time, but a very long time ago, someone, Randall probably wrote this, that was converted to C++ by Andre, and it's very similar, and then we've converted it to Rust. We've oxidized it recently, and you can see like there's a little bit of extra kind of Rust stuff, but it is effectively the same code that has kind of survived at least a decade. I just thought that was an interesting little piece of information. So you can get involved. Nearly all of the repositories I mentioned today are publicly available on GitHub. Some of these have Docker images, which you can use to run them locally or on your favorite HPC cluster that supports Singularity containers. You don't even have to compile any Rust to use these. Personally, so that's Beely, Aothega, Cotter, Hyperdrive, Pi, MWA lib all have Docker containers. And personally, I really appreciate any feedback I get in my work, whether it's positive or constructive. And this applies to Beely and MALU in particular. So if you're using these software and you find some unclear documentation or a really important missing feature, then open an issue or send me a message. I've got my contact details on the thank you screen. And then yeah, we encourage you to try and write tests if you're opening a pull request, but don't let this stop you from contributing. If you're too scared of writing tests, we are there to help, and we can help you out with that. Tests are more scared of you than you are of them. Awesome, thank you everyone. There's a lot of people that I'd like to thank on the screen. I've got my socials, and you can download the slides in the bottom left corner. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dev. That was an amazing talk. And I'm hoping there's lots of questions about this new pipeline, because yeah, it's just brilliant. It's staggering the amount of work that you've done just this year to not only come up to speed with the project, but to deliver this whole pipeline that's coming along online at the same time as MWAX, and all the other back-end changes that are happening at the same time, which Greg and Harry will talk about soon. So any questions? No, we're all very quiet today. Don't make me show more old photos, or maybe that's what you want. Nicole.
Yeah, so if we have thoughts on features we would like incorporated in, say, Beerly, would you like us to put it on like an issue on the GitHub?
Yeah, sorry, I've just had to swap mic. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Yes, that would be great. Since, yeah, in general, opening an issue or just even just chatting to me directly, if you have a look on the Beerly projects page, so you go to the Beerly repo and click projects, there's like a Kanban mirror of our internal Jira that kind of shows you what we're going to be working on next and the order that we're going to be working on it next. So the feature that you want to request might already be in there, but if it's not, have a chat with me and we can talk. We can see how we want to prioritize that feature. And if you know someone who wants to write it as well, more than welcome to open your own pull request, and we can have a chat about, you know, I'm happy to support anyone, especially if people are new to Rust. Happy to support people there.
Thanks.
Chris Jordan's also got a question in the chat. When does the orc rewrite begin?
Yeah, this is a great joke. We've been at Kairi, here at Kairi, we've been doing the Advent of Code challenge. So every day until Christmas, there is a new coding challenge, and I started off trying to do it in Rust, and every time I did it in Rust, I noticed, hang on, I could do this in the GNU Orc program in like half the amount of bytes that it takes to do it in Rust. So I was like, nah, this is my new favorite language now. Forget Rust. Let's rewrite Beerly in Orc.
You can tell exactly how much I know about this because I thought that was a serious question. But I know Greg has been doing the Advent of Code, and his latest solution was in Excel. So, you know, we could just rewrite Cotter in Excel as well, by the sounds of things. Just have all these rewrites. Sounds amazing.
It's my secret shame.
Not so secret now. Sorry, Greg. Well, if there's any more questions, I'll give you a few seconds. All right, well next up, we have a similar topic. We'll be talking about ASVO and the archive, and how you can access all of the lovely data that's going to be coming out of MWAX in the coming year, and hopefully longer than that. So I think Greg was going to begin this talk. It's a joint talk.
I will get going now. So I'll do the screen sharing face that we all love while we click around and try to get it. That one, there we go. All right, hopefully you should be able to see my screen. Is that a yes? Am I getting a yes? I'm getting a yes, okay. Brilliant. So my name is Greg Sleep and I'm the MWA data manager. And I've just got to say that I've really enjoyed all the talks so far. They've been really good and funny. And it's been you know, quite a light tone, even though we're talking about serious engineering and serious science. So this is great. I'm also told that we're a little bit ahead of schedule, so that's good. I can ramble on a bit longer. So I will. This is a tag team. So so I'll finish my talk and then I'll hand over to Harry. And then maybe we'll just do questions at the end combined for both of us. So so my talk is about the data archive, MWAX data flow. I'll be talking about a new or upgraded MWAX near real-time calibration pipeline, and a bit of show and tell about replacing the MWA correlator. So onto the serious stuff. So my main day job, even though for the last 6 months, I've been heavily involved in MWAX and we haven't really done much ingest, so I haven't had to do much as the data manager. However, this is just shows you the growth of the archive over time since pretty much since just before 128T was commissioned. And as you can see, the last couple of periods, we've basically had no growth. That's fair enough, considering that the correlator was offline for a while, and then we did the site trip to install it, and then engineering commissioning, and now science commissioning. So we're ramping up the amount of data we're collecting in science commissioning, and that will certainly increase quite a bit in the next 6 months as we progress through with the SMART survey, hopefully, and then onto long baseline mode for presumably the 2022A season. So with the fact that that our capacity at the moment is almost at the limit, so we've got about 4.4 petabytes remaining that we can utilize. The good news is we do get a little bit of relief soon. So next year, as Pawsey implements its new long-term storage system, one part of that system is called Acacia, and it's basically a big Ceph-based disk long-term storage system. And so we don't know exactly yet how much capacity we're getting from that. The total for the whole system is about 70 petabytes. And I believe that we're kind of being told on the grapevine by Pawsey that we'll get around 10. So that could be anything from 5 to 15, really, but I'd be banking on 10. That should come online, excuse me, in the first quarter of next year, hopefully. So that will help reduce the need to do any sort of purging of any old data or hunting around frantically to find space. The MWA team has also, in combination with Astronomy Australia Limited, AL, received some funding via the ARDC that will basically go to Pawsey to provide us with an additional 2 to 3 petabytes of storage. That probably won't come online though until the second half of next year, but it's certainly you know, a welcome addition. So anything is going to help. So this is the usual plot that you see, the pie chart of the volume of each project for all time. Not much is surprising in this. The bottom right-hand corner other section continues to grow with lots and lots of little projects contributing to that. But other than that, this really hasn't changed much since you last saw it 6 months ago. So I just wanted to talk about, or I guess follow on from Randall's great talk about the MWAX data flow and just sort of focus on the archiving and data storage side of things. So this is now what our data flow looks like at the high level. So it's the glossy diagram. And as you can see, we've got the MWAX media conversion servers, we've got the MWAX correlator on site. And once the data gets written to disk by the MWAX correlator, so this is either voltages or visibilities, they go down the 100 gig link to the Curtin data center where we've got 10 servers, 8 which are sort of hot and 2 standby. And their job is basically just to buffer the data before it gets to Pawsey. So this provides us a way to ensure that we can keep observing even when the link to Pawsey or Pawsey itself potentially is out of action. We also have local storage on the MWAX correlator as well. So that's it's about 30 terabytes for each MWAX server for voltages and another 30 for visibilities. So we have quite a large capacity on site in case our link from site to Perth goes down. So we've got, you know, quite a few, you know, historically there's been quite a few single points of failure with the MWA, and that's still the case in many places, just due to resourcing. But we've tried to put in as many redundancies as we can to minimize any sort of issues if anything failed. So once the data gets down to Pawsey, we're currently still going into the same DMF-based tape system that we've always had, although Harry will be talking a little bit about the future of that, and that should come into play next year. So I'll digress here and just in the in the theme of people showing photos, embarrassing and otherwise. I don't have much historical stuff, but we've got a MWAX data flow whiteboard from 2019, which I thought should be shown for historical purposes. We did actually get outdoors on the MWAX site trip for the final day, just as we were leaving, and also the photo down there with Brian losing his keys in one of the receivers. Maybe he wasn't actually losing his keys, but it certainly looks that way. That was back in April for, I think, Harrison's first site trip. Anyway, I digress. So one thing I want to talk about is the upgraded calibration pipeline that so the calibration pipeline that we had that was originally developed by Marcin and Chris had done its job really well and basically made sure that all of the historical observations and new observations that were calibrators were having their calibration solution produced and then stored in the MWA database, which could then be used by things like the ASVO to provide calibrated visibilities to users. So this is just building upon that work and making it work for MWAX, but also moving the processing onto site so that we have less latency between when a calibrator observation comes off the correlator and when we've got the calibration solution ready. So we can pretty much reduce that latency now down to minutes instead of hours, which means that we can use those calibration solutions by various future things that we're working on. So all the MWAX boxes send their visibilities for each calibrator observation, and you'll see some old friends here or some new friends, MWA, Beerly, Malu, and Hyperdrive, of which we use those to produce the calibration solutions, and then some glue code that will upload them to the MWA calibration database. So these calibration solutions are going to be really useful for us because they give us regular feedback on receiver tile dipole problems using those solutions. MWA users will be able to download the solutions via a web service. I mean, this exists already for the existing calibration pipeline. And the MWA ASVO will provide users with calibrated MWAX visibilities. The asterisk there is just because Beerly right at this minute doesn't have the capability to apply them, but that is a feature that will eventually end up in Beerly. And in the future, the calibration pipeline will allow us to enable fringe stopping, coherent beamforming, and other novel uses. So the last bit of my talk is really another bit of a show and tell, actually, about the delivery of the MWAX correlator and the installation on site. So as you can see, we've got lots of boxes here, and that was actually the left-hand picture there is only 2 pallets worth. So we actually had a third pallet with another 6 servers on it. And we've got lots of boxes of stuff that arrived. So it all arrived in Cairo around June. We basically did a whole bunch of staging activities, which involved hardware checkout, installing GPUs, network cards, setting up all the settings of the servers so that we can talk to them remotely, installing the operating system. We did EMC testing. I think Dev was showing their love for GPUs and how excited they were for the GPUs. I'm not sure if he was, if they were ESD safe at that point, but the GPU seems to work, so I think we're okay. We'll just skip past that one. So in the first week of the site trip, it really was about breaking eggs. And it was quite daunting to get to the point where we were saying, yes, let's actually pull this stuff out, because there was no coming back from that. So we've removed the fine BFB hardware, the GPU boxes. Mia did a mammoth job replumbing the Phobot and making the cabling all nice so that we can actually understand where all the fibers are going. We converted 16 VCS boxes to have 8 MedConf boxes, and we did a lot of cleanup and removal of cables, and we were able to rack up the MWAX servers. I took a video sometime in the middle of that first week, just showing the magnitude of stuff that we had lying around the place. I'll see if this video works. So yes, a messy workplace is an effective workplace. We were very busy. Lots of boxes, lots of cables. That was out of the Farn BFB. So yes, it was a big trip. And of course, no site trip is complete without a visit from Steve. And so in week 2, so one thing I will mention is that yes, the plan was for 3 weeks of site trips. So on week 2, we added Harris and Barlow this time to the site trip. So it was Andy, Mia, and me and Harry this time. And we basically finished the job of cabling up the MWAX servers, deploying the software stacks to the servers, tidying the cables, documenting everything, verifying the medconv and EDT data that was coming out of the receivers was good. We found a lot of brand new cables that just didn't work. We eventually were able to reprogram them and make them work with a fiber SFP programming tool, which is good. We did swear frequently, but at the same time, it was actually a very, very productive week. We had a significant to-do list on the return to Perth that week, but we did it in only 2 site trips. So basically, once we got back on the Friday, the following Monday was the start of engineering commissioning. So it was a big team effort, and a lot of work went into those 2 weeks. It was quite frantic, but at the same time, we achieved everything we set out to achieve. And yeah, with only a few little follow-up things later on that Andy fixed up for us. So thank you, Andy. And that's it for me. So I'll hand over to Harry now and stop sharing my screen.
Hello, everybody. Just 1 second.
As soon as I can actually get my...
Okay, can everybody hear me and see my screen? I think I heard a yes. Hello, everybody. My name's Harry Barlow. I'm the lead developer of the MWA ASBO, and today I'm going to be giving an update on a few items from the last sort of 6 months or so, as well as talking a little bit about sort of what's on our development roadmap over through 2022. So specifically, that's going to include updates on the data lifecycle policy that we spoke about in the previous project meeting, what's going on with the policy long-term storage systems, some of the work that I've been doing with respect to changes to how the ASBO processes jobs, as well as yeah, some of the work that we've got planned in our roadmap. So first up, the data lifecycle policy. So just a quick refresher on what this is. So at the end of, this is the policy that was approved by the MWA board at the end of last year that governs how we're able to manage the MWA archive in a more sustainable way. And it stipulates policies for how data is removed from the archive on a sort of rolling basis, with older data being sort of purged in order to make room for new ingest. But it also stipulates mechanisms for how people can both apply for a protected quota within the archive to prevent important data from being deleted, as well as for project PIs to be able to remove data that is either no longer useful or not very good. So in the process of working through and implementing this policy, we did uncover some jurisdictional constraints. With regards to the State Records Act, so the Curtin Records Management team had to work with the state government to sort of find a way forward there, and we're now integrating their recommendations into the policy itself. Development work for this effort is still largely done, and we're now kind of in the process of slotting this back into our development roadmap and continuing to test and validate all of the work. So we're hoping to get that done pretty much as a first priority through 2022. Okay, so the PORSI long-term storage systems, I believe that I spoke about this in my previous project meeting talk, but the 2 new storage systems at PORSI have now been given names, and I think that Greg spoke about one of them before. So they are now called Acacia and Banksia. So Acacia is the 70 petabyte disk-based object storage system, of which our allocation is still yet to be determined, but we're hoping to find out exactly how much we're going to be getting very soon. If you haven't heard of Acacia, I do recommend that you check it out because Porsi are currently accepting requests for quota within that system. So get it while it's hot. And Banksia will essentially be the replacement for the existing archive system. So even though it's still built using all of the same tape hardware itself, there's some additional systems that are built on top of that, which will change how we interact with that system. And both of those systems are expected in Q1 or Q2 of next year. Okay, so I've been very busy over the last 6 to 12 months, basically re-engineering how the MWA ASPO is able to process jobs. So at the moment, it currently uses 2 bare metal servers at Porsi to do things like run Cotter and stage data from the archive and serve it back out to the community. But that's all now been migrated to Garawala. We've also added the ability to leave data directly on Astro, which is good news because it essentially will allow people who do use Porsi systems to essentially remove the step from their workflow of having to then download data from ASPO back onto Astro. If you don't choose the Astro option, then you will still be able to access the data via Acacia, via a downloadable URL, very similar to how you do now. VCS downloads are now also supported, or at least they will be when the new system launches. However, that will be for privileged users. So if you are interested in getting access to VCS data, then please let us know. And I've also been integrating the ASPO with Beely. And the good news is that we've been using this whole system to serve out MWAC science commissioning data to the community, and it seems to be performing very, very well so far. So again, that's either as raw visibilities or pre-processed with Beely. However, you can still opt to use Cotter for legacy data if you want to. And we're expecting to deploy all of this very early next year. So a few things that you need to know about how the new system works is that if you do specify that you want your data to be left on Astro, it will be left in the path /Astro/ your Porsi group /ASPO, and then / the job ID that you get from the ASPO. For this to work, you will have to have a Porsi group set up in your ASPO account, and this is something that you will need to contact support for and seek approval from that Porsi group's PI. Or you will be able to download jobs via, like I mentioned earlier, a URL, an S3 client, or the manta ray client is now being modified to work with this new process. Very similar to how they are now, Brooks is still responsible for managing their own quota. So you might want to review how much space is left for that particular group before you submit a job. And finally, job priority now works a little bit differently because I've kind of had to work within the confines of Slurm, but I've given it the best effort to emulate the current round robin system that the ASPO currently uses. And if anybody is interested in that, I'm going to be posting an article to the MWA wiki for you to have a look. So just a quick diagram showing what the data flow will look like in this new world. So Greg already kind of mentioned this whole section here. So with data coming down the 100 gig link from the MRO over to Curtin campus. Eventually, when Acacia and Banksia come online, data will be ingested directly into Acacia. And then at some stage, we'll be developing a process that will be migrating data from Acacia into Banksia, again, in order to make room for new ingest. And then all the data within Banksia will be cleaned up by the data lifecycle policy. And then ASPO will be grabbing data from both of these systems and again, sending it out via either Acacia or Astro. And in terms of what the architecture actually looks like for the ASPO now, so as a job request comes into our ASPO web server that sits inside of AWS, that will validate the request just to make sure that it's all good. And if so, post a message onto an Amazon SQS queue. There is then a process that runs at Porsi every minute that polls this queue for new messages. And when it receives one, it will pass it and figure out what to do with it. And then it will submit a workflow to Slurm. So either a voltage download job or a conversion job, either running Beely or Cotter or just a raw visibility job, and then submit a series of jobs to the scheduler, which will then be picked up at some point later by either one of the Garawala worker nodes or the data mover nodes, with the resultant data products being left on either Acacia or Astro, where it can be downloaded by users. So in terms of what's coming up over the next 12 months, so obviously integrating the new system with Acacia and Banksia as they come online, finalizing the implementation of the data lifecycle policy, a few smaller sort of quality of life improvements with the ASBO, such as the ability to view your job history and the ability to view current information about the archive and the queue. A lot of that work is already done, and I have demoed screenshots of it before, so we're hoping to get all of that finally integrated into the production code base. And finally, this is definitely going to be a bigger item, but we're currently looking at doing imaging jobs with WS Clean. And this is something that we're going to be seeking a lot of input from the community on the best way to go about it. The end sort of goal here would be that if you are able to run an imaging job with WS Clean, you would then be able to view what that looks like with Porcy's Carter system. So that's quite exciting. And finally, I always have this slide in my project meeting talks, but it's always worth mentioning. We're always open to suggestions, improvements, and feature requests. If you do have anything that you would like to see in the ASBO, please send an email to asbo_support@mwatelescope.org. So thank you for listening.
Well, thank you both very much. That was excellent. We probably have time for one quick question. I'm sure Andy is chomping at the bit to do his site update. So were there any questions? I can say that something I didn't notice before, but I appreciate now, is Ben sent me, I appreciate the matchy color scheme, first of all these tools, but also that you can spell out my own name with them, as Ben pointed out. So that's how I'm going to appear from now on. Here is my Google album of the entire MWAX install, and I just want to emphasize again how big a job it was. Brian couldn't come along with us on the trip, which terrified me. So I listened to him give a TED talk about the correlator and all the inputs in the Phobot for hours. And I made notes after, like, rewatching all these videos to take with me, just so that we would be sure that we were doing it right. We've got the wreath flowers, we've got the mess of cables that was before, and how nice and shiny it is now with all of the it's even better now. Andy might tell you, but he's installed some cable runs. We've got the obligatory selfies. We've got the racks without anything in them, and it hasn't been like that for donkey's years now. We've got photos of Steve. We've got everything you could possibly want in this site trip. It took we've got, playing card games at night in the donga, which is a slight upgrade from the dongas of the past. So I appreciate that even more now. All our beautifully cabling efforts, and all the notes that you make on paper, as well as all the sexy photos of the new equipment installed and the success. So it was a really awesome trip, and we had the Deputy Premier, Roger Cook, Minister Roger Cook, come out to officially open the new correlator, and I think he had the honour of pressing the button that turned on all the fans of all the servers at once, and it completely blew them away, almost literally. It was a big noise and big fans. So with that, I suppose we'll hand over to Andy.
Thanks, Mia. So I'll just share my screen. And can everyone see that?
Yep.
Brilliant. Hello everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Andy and I'm the site guy. And this is just a quick update on the last 6 months of site activity. For those of you that may recall the presentation in July, I mentioned that one of the challenges we were experiencing in July was the extreme amount of wet weather that we'd had on site. And the last 6 months, I've actually got the benefit, or see the benefits to the countryside of that wet weather. It's been a very, very long wildflower season, and the budgies are in plague proportions, as this photo kind of shows. There is literally no silence up there anymore. Those little buggers are just chirping away all the time. In the last 6 months, we've done 12 site trips, and the focus the main effort for the last 6 months has been getting the MWA telescope back on Sky with its new correlator. So one of the supporting efforts to getting the telescope back online was the solar panel batteries. And this photo is just a little grab from Andrew Williams's Grafana page, which shows me the solar panel battery voltages. And as you can see above that green line, we've got a solar panel battery that's just starting to drop off, and they're just slowly dropping off at the moment as they approach their 3rd birthday. And the effort in the last 6 months, and it will be pretty much ongoing, will be as they start to fail, is to try and get new batteries in there before the batteries completely fail. We've replaced about 40 of those batteries at the moment, and there is 220 batteries on site. So we're slowly getting through them. As everyone's discussed so far, there's the correlator install. There's the old correlator there on the left and the new correlator on the right. We did try and give the old correlator to a local TAFE electronics course for them to have a play with and destroy even further than we wanted to destroy it. But unfortunately, they couldn't take it off our hands due to hazardous substance declarations and things like that. So that's eventually going to make its way into e-waste. We are recycling and trying to reuse as much of the stuff as we can to try and limit our footprint and our environmental waste impact. As Mia mentioned, following on from the correlator install was the installation of overhead fibre optic cable ducts. The purpose here in these is just to protect the fibre optic cables and not have them laying on the bench. It serves, the duct serves a number of purposes. So they protect the fibre optic cables, but also they allow the technicians that do all the infrastructure maintenance into the room to actually have access to some of the fire response equipment that's within the cabinet. So I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's these little white poly tubes that you can see look like half circles sticking up. They actually are provide air particulate matter sampling for internal to the cabinets that the technicians need to be able to ensure that the seals are 100% have 100% integrity, so that there's no actual aerosol contaminant getting into that pipeline. And it was always a problem for them with our rack getting access to those pipes, but now we've made it a lot easier for them. Eventually, the cable ducting will go all the way to the end. And yes, if you look at the end of that photo, that is what our racks did look like. And we do need to tidy up our act a bit. The next big project underway after the correlator install, and I've been talking about it quite a bit, is the LNA cable replacement program. That has actually commenced. We've received the cables and we started about three weeks ago. I did some of the enabling work and we actually started full throttle last week. We've completed, we're only focusing on the extended reconfig tiles, the extended array tiles at the moment. So there's 128 tiles in the extended array, and we've completed approximately 20 of those tiles at the moment. That may sound like a pretty fast pace in just 2 weeks, but as we get further and further into the extended array, the tiles get further and further apart. So there's more and more walking time between tiles. So we will actually slow down a bit at that effort. And the aim here is to have as many of the extended array tiles completed by the time we do the extended array reconfig early next year. So for the science teams that take the data from the extended array, it's going to be pretty lush for you blokes, for you guys. What you will have on the extended array tiles is brand new LNA cables hooked up to upgraded beamformers, so the obsolete parts have been removed. all the LNAs have been swapped out and replaced with inspected and tested LNAs, and all the LNAs are fixed to antennas, dipoles that have been inspected for any damage and removed and replaced. And the fixings to the dipole are a standard 8mm stainless steel panhead screw that will be consistent across the telescope. Prior to that, we'd had 6 years of history of trying different fixings to try and get the right one for that LNA. So it should be a brand new telescope to the best of our efforts. The only drama we'll have is that, and it's, if you look at the photo on the right, you can see, it's a bit hard to see, but the ground screens are slowly degrading. If we tried to replace the ground screens while we're doing the LNA cables, we would not get it done within the space of a year. So we'll bring the telescope up to the best chance we can get so we'll bring the telescope up to the best that we can, with the exception of the ground planes. And the ground planes will be the next focus once we've got the compact array refitted out with brand new LNA cables. And then upcoming challenges. Probably you're all sick of hearing it, I know I am, but it's COVID, COVID, COVID. For those of you that aren't aware, the last time we did a reconfig was March, April 2020 from memory. I remember it well because I was stuck up on site for the lockdown to get the reconfig done. And then the next reconfig is happening next year. For those of you that aren't familiar with the WA situation, it's going to happen about the same time that WA is opening up. So we've been lucky in that we have not had a lot of COVID experience in WA. So we're actually going to be letting COVID in. And that's going to be, how that's going to shake out in WA, we all sort of don't know. We've all got an idea, but it's going to happen at the same time as the reconfig is going to happen. So it'll be an interesting reconfig. As a consequence of the new correlator, we're also introducing a new reconfig procedure. Prior to, or with the old correlator, we sort of were fixed in what receivers went where and how we had to replumb the fibers and everything like that. The new correlator provides us a great degree of freedom into where we can and what we can do with receivers. So we're going to explore some different options. Randall's got his fingers in the pie with that reconfig procedure a bit. So at the possibly June 2022 MWA virtual conference, we'll be able to discuss what we did and how we did it, and the benefits going forward for the new telescope, for the telescope in different and new reconfig procedures. And I'll just flick through the questions I've got here from Ben. Are there lots of plants growing up through the ground screens? Yes, there are. They will be there for about another 3 weeks, because next week it's going to be 44 degrees on site every day for about 3 days. So there will be no plants left after that, pretty much. And then from Andrew Williams, that's not really a question, but he's just commenting on the reliability of the Raspberry Pis in the solar panel tiles, which is pretty amazing considering the conditions up there. Does anyone else have any questions before I flick everything back to Mia? Go for it, Ramesh.
I think he's in the boardroom. So
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So there's obviously lots of things going behind the scene we don't get to see until one of you show these pictures. So I was curious, these LNAs that are being replaced, are they essentially identical copies of what is out there, or are they like substitutes or newer versions of what is available now, or is there, that are they like Is there any reason to expect them to give any improved performance over what we have?
No, so so the procedure for the LNA swap out is that we've got about 60 spare LNAs of the current version of the LNA. And then I've stripped probably 8 tiles worth, so another 16 lots of 8 LNAs of the current version. And then the lab guys down here get all those LNAs, they test and verify them within a week. So they're doing 250 LNAs a week. And they're pumping them back to me up on site. So it's literally just taking an LNA out from site that's currently on site, current version, they test and confirm that it is perfectly fine and send it back to site. There's no new LNA being purchased or anything like that.
Thanks.
All right, thanks so much, Andy. We really can't overstate the value add of your time on this project. I love how you treat the effort that goes into reconfigurations like a personal best that you need to beat every year with less time and less people every single time, to the point where I would not be surprised if one day you reported that you had simply lifted the receivers onto your own back and shot putted them to their new locations. Thank you so much for your talk. And speaking of the lab guys, we're actually lab women. We have 2 new technicians on board this year, Venus and Ash, and they're about to give their first talk. And it's just a quick update about the maintenance that they do.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Venus and this is Ash, and we are from the maintenance team of MWA here at Curtin.
Perfect. I can see that screen.
Yeah. Where am I? Sorry.
It's okay. You're coming to us live from the lab, is that right?
Yeah, we're in the lab. Yeah. So just. We are going to discuss about the MWA electronics equipment that we are currently servicing to provide support to the MWA operations. We will also share some progress with regards to the work currently happening at the MRO and here at Curtin. And we will also show some pictures from the MRO visit we had last September. So to start off, these are the list of the electronic parts we are currently servicing and testing. It is our job to make sure they are in good working condition and function the way they should. As you can see in the list, we've got the LNAs, the beamformers, the delay line boards, BDOC, CPLD, RDOC, the coax and fiber, and the ASC. So we make sure that we test and maintain them in good working condition. I would also like to show you the signal path from the sky until it reaches the data storage. So from the signal from the sky, our antenna receives it, and the LNA sitting on top of the antenna amplify it and pass it to the beamformer, which further amplify the signal. It combines all the 16 signals from all 16 antennas and pass it to the receiver, which is the last stage of amplification and filtering before it passes to the data storage and processing and media conversion. This is, as you can see in the screen, this is our beamformer test setup in our lab. This is our setup for conducting RF tests for the electronic parts boards inside the beamformer. We connect it into a spectrum analyzer, the RF analyzer we have. This will tell us if the beamformer is functioning the way it should. Once it passes, we then put the beamformer under soak test for the minimum of 48 hours. and retest it again before transporting it back to the site. We would also like to share a few updates about the work and projects currently taking place. I would like to talk about the PartDB. The PartDB is a database, an online database where users can search the availability of a particular component. PartDB is still a work in progress, but it is very useful to track components location and current quantity. By using PartDB, we can also create a bill of material for a particular device or board, which is very useful if we are repairing that particular board or electronic device. Also, we can monitor if the parts are already their minimum level, and it will prompt us to reorder more. As you can see in the screen, this is the PartDB screen. You can see the description of the component, the part number, where it is located, and the current quantity of that particular component. And this is the screen capture of the bill of materials you can find in the PartDB. As I said, it's very useful especially if we are repairing these electronic parts. We can just have a look at this bill of materials, and it will pinpoint which drawers we can find these particular components that we need. So with regards to the beamformers upgrade progress, to date, we have upgraded 182 out of the 290 beamformers. That is about 63% of the total beamformers we have in the field. So our role as technicians is to prepare the beamformer for upgrade, assemble it once we have received them, and perform a functionality test to ensure they are working well. As you can see, there are some step-by-step procedure we follow for the beamformer upgrade. So we prepare the boards to be shipped to the third party for board upgrade. We strip them down from the beamformers from sites. And once we receive them, we do the assembly and testing of these boards, make sure they function well before transporting them back to site. So there's the resistance check we are conducting, and then we assemble the beamformer, and then the voltage check, the spectrum analyzer check, the network analyzer check, and a soak test for a minimum of 48 hours. Post-soak, we also do again the spectrum and network analyzer test. I will pass you on to Ash, and she will be talking about LNAs.
Thank you, Ines. Here I'm going to talk about our role in LNA maintenance, that is low noise amplifier. As Andy mentioned earlier, this huge LNA replacement project is happening at MRO right now. Resultantly, approximately 250 LNAs per week come back to us for processing. Our role includes assigning serial numbers to these LNAs and cataloging them, testing, and repairs. So firstly, let me give a brief introduction about LNAs. As the name suggests, LNA, low noise amplifier, amplifies weak signal from weak sky signal with little degradation and minimum noise. In MWA antenna, LNAs are placed here. So this is the top view. Each side of the LNA represents each dipole of the antenna. The top side is X and bottom side is Y. LNA cables are plugged on Y side. This is how LNA looks like, X and Y. As a part of LNA maintenance, these are the steps we follow. First, visual inspection, voltage testing, RF testing, and then repairs. First of all the LNAs that come back to us are inspected for physical damage, like broken or loose solder legs, missing damaged components, incorrect labeling. Once it's all fixed, labels are assigned and entered to our database. The following test results, observations, and repair details will be updated in the database for tracking purposes. Second step is voltage testing. This is to check if enough DC bias voltage is getting to the driving circuit. This is the setup. It's basically giving powering the LNA on and checking all the test points and looking for the expected voltage readings. Also, the current should be 107 to 112 milliamps. Third step is RF testing. The test is to check RF response of both LNA polarization. This test is conducted using the LNA test chick as shown in the picture. And this is the resultant plot. We are looking at the network analyzer. So if both tests pass, the results are then stored in a database again and ready to ship to MRO. So if the failed LNAs undergo repair process, if the measured voltage is not correct or the plot is not following through the sample plot, this could be the common faults like damaged amplifier, inductor, shorted capacitors, corroded pads. So based on the measurements and the plots we get, we determine the causes and replace the respective components. And the newly repaired LNAs are then retested and sent back to the site. So next, we'll show them some pictures from our site. Yeah. This is the, we were lucky enough to be there in the nicest time of the year. Spring, lots of flowers and nice weather. And sorry. This one. And finally, Steve says thank you to you all. So thank you, Mia.
Well, thank you, Venus. Thank you, Ash. That was an excellent talk. I really appreciate the slide showing the acronyms, which are often numerous and forgotten about in talks like these. Ben actually has a question. I know you said no questions, but this should be pretty easy. What is a soak test and is it exactly what it sounds like?
Okay, soak test is actually we kind of mimic the condition of the site itself, just so we know how our beamformers will perform once we have the upgrade and the repair. Should we show it to them? If you want. Yeah. So
it's 48 hours.
Yeah, they will undergo a test for a minimum of 48 hours. And this test determines if they will pass or fail
in the harsh conditions.
In the harsh condition, because there's also a temperature involved. And yeah.
So not quite like leaving your dirty dishes to soak in the sink,
No,
but sort of similar. Yes, yes, yes. All right, well, thank you again. I think it really highlighted a lot of the invisible work that goes on, which is so important for maintaining the high quality of the data that we provide to the collaboration. So you're off the hook. Well done. And up next is a talk that I have to turn off the live recording for. Because it discusses results that are still under embargo, which makes it pretty special. So without further ado,